Good morning all, and good morning to our Mayor, Deputy Mayor Valerie Shawcross, and the Transport for Commissioner for London. Good morning to you all, and if you just give me a few moments, I'll return to you. Can I, got a frog in my throat. Welcome members, and can I ask if there are any apologies for absences?
We have apologies, Chair, from Assembly Member Duval, Assembly Member Gavron and Assembly Member Russell.
Oh, thank you. And a couple of Chair's announcements. I know that the Mayor has tweeted out, and I'd like to join him on behalf of the Assembly in thanking everyone who was involved in ensuring that the PQT took place last week. It seems a while back now. And my special thanks to the members, including those in Mr. Copley's tweet, who got there just in time. Absolutely, and it was an excellent PQT, and I've seen some feedbacks and received some feedback myself, and everyone that I've been in touch with appeared to have had an enjoyable evening. I also then just want to add that today, as we all know, is International Women's Day. We know how we've come here because 100 years ago, some extraordinarily brave women and citizens in London and across the world, I suppose, to paraphrase, decided enough was enough and decided that they would do all they could to bring about suffrage. And that meant, in some instances, to give in their lives so that, in a sense, we could be here, because people used that X against our names so that we could be here to represent Londoners. So in our work today, we will show that that was something that we honour, and that's something that we pride and use well. And I just want to finish with a quote by my favourite person in all the world, and that's Professor Mary Baird. And she reminds us, you cannot easily fit women into a structure that is already coded as male. You have to change the structure. That's to you, Mayor. And you're doing your best, I know. So let's move on. Throughout the week, there's been work finalising the Assembly's response to the Mayor's draft London plan, and thanks to all the members who's been involved with that, and also to say thank you to all our members who have worked so hard on scrutiny and actions related to the production of this mayoral strategy that we will be discussing in just a few moments. I also want to put on record our thanks to all the experts and all of the Londoners who have responded directly to the current chair and to the committee about the strategy. And then lastly, going back to International Women's Day, I just want to remind Assembly members, and I know the Mayor has it in his diary, that we will be hosting an event in London's Living Room to celebrate International Women's Day this evening. And the theme is a great theme for us to reflect on, Press for Progress. Okay, now let's go to declarations. Can I ask the Assembly to note the recommendations set out at item 2? Do members have any other declarations to make? Did I see a hand go up? No? Did you put your hand up to make an extra declaration? No? Okay. To items on the agenda for today's meeting, including in relation to gifts and hospitalities, which is not yet reflected on the authorities' register. Thank you. Item 3, the minutes. Can I ask the Assembly to agree the minutes of the London Assembly plenary meeting held on 8th February 2018 to be signed by me as a correct record?
Agreed.
And then it's item 4. The purpose here this morning is to put questions to the Mayor, and as I said, our other guests who are with him. And that is in relation to the publication of the Mayor's draft transport strategy. And just to say how we're going to be handling the meeting, there's one lead-off question, and Assembly members can ask supplementary questions after the question has been answered. Before asking the lead-off question, the Assembly will receive a short opening statement from the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor. And I'll call upon wait a moment, sorry. I'll call upon the Mayor to explain the changes. In fact, no, let me hear your draft opening statement and the Deputy, and then I'll come back and put the question. Okay, that's the way to do it.
Thank you, Chair. Can I thank you for what you said about people's question time, but also about International Women's Day? I'm sure those sentiments are felt by everyone in the chamber today. It's a pleasure to be here today to discuss the final draft of my transport strategy. It's a strategy that the Transport Commissioner, the Deputy Mayor for Transport, myself, and the wider team are really excited about, because we think it does something that's never been done before in London or any comparable global city. By looking beyond pure transport to health, well-being and quality of life, I really believe we've developed the best, most ambitious and realistic transport strategy of any major city in the world. To do this, we've captured the unique opportunity transport provides to make life better for Londoners. Transport brings our city together and helps Londoners make the most of the opportunities our city offers, but it also shapes Londoners' lives in countless different ways, from unlocking job creation and home building to making our city more affordable, improving Londoners' health, shaping communities, and making our city a better place to live, work, and visit. And I'm pleased to report that we received more than 6,500 responses, the vast majority of which were positive. During the consultation process, we engaged with Londoners, charities, local government, campaign groups, and organisations across our city. This ambitious vision for transport, health, and quality of life has captured the imagination and support of Londoners, and we now have a really strong mandate to put it into practice. At the heart of this strategy is our Healthy Streets approach, with a relentless focus on creating a cleaner, greener and safer city. I want to see 80% of all travel in London made by foot, by cycling or on public transport by 2041. This is a hugely ambitious target, but one we must meet together. This includes tackling London's terrible air pollution crisis, which causes huge damage to Londoners' health. It builds on the work we've already done by introducing the world's first toxicity charge and low-emission bus zones, and works towards the introduction of the world's first ultra-low emission zone next year in central London and its eventual expansion. This strategy covers some hugely transformational projects that will change the face of our city for future generations and are coming sooner than many realise. From the opening of the Elizabeth line later this year to the transformation of Oxford Street also starting this year. Both of these have been talked about since the early 1970s. And we continue to work with government to make progress in Crossrail 2. This will help to unlock hundreds of thousands of new jobs and homes for Londoners. It also comes against the backdrop of a difficult financial situation for TfL, caused by the previous mayor accepting the withdrawal of government operating grant, leaving London as the only major city in Europe where a transport system operates without government funding. I've been left the difficult job of clearing up the mess, and that's exactly what I'm doing. Pushing TfL to become more efficient without impacting upon customers. TfL has realised over £700 million of cost savings since I became mayor, almost 9% of operating costs over the last 2 years. They're now on track to achieve an operating surplus by the end of this business plan, a stark contrast to the £572 million deficit forecast at the end of the previous Mayor's plan. And crucially, all of this will be achieved without the crippling fare rises we saw under the previous Mayor, an increase of more than 42%, and also those that were planned to continue to rise from 2016, an additional 13% increase planned by the previous Mayor. I'm incredibly proud of what we've achieved on transport since I became Mayor, not just freezing all TfL fares and introducing the hopper fare, but getting the night tube and overground up and running, increasing capacity across the tube network, bringing land forward to build new, genuinely affordable homes, establishing low-emission bus zones and introducing the toxicity charge. Record investment in walking and cycling, increasing the number of step-free stations across our city and reducing the number of days lost to strikes on the tube network by a staggering 66% compared to the previous Mayor, to name just a few. I'm convinced that this transport strategy lays out deliverable plans for doing much more to improve Londoners' lives over the years ahead. Finally, Chair, as the Assembly knows, I'm running a year-long gender equality campaign behind every great city. The campaign celebrates the historic and current achievements of women in London and, crucially, tries to drive change to make gender equality a reality in our city. This plenary comes, as you said, on International Women's Day, and I wanted to take a moment to inform Assembly members of a new collaboration announced today between Transport for London and the leading domestic abuse refuge provider, Hestia. It will explore how victims of domestic abuse can seek the help and support they desperately need as part of their regular journeys, which is less likely to cause suspicion from an abuser. This new pilot project seeks to provide safe, private spaces that could be the first step for victims of domestic abuse to access the services and support they need. This is yet another example of how Transport for London can shape Londoners' lives far beyond how they get from A to B, and a reminder of why this strategy has so much potential to improve the lives of the people we represent.
Thank you for that opening statement and the announcement, Mr. Mayor. Deputy Mayor Shawcross.
Chair, I hadn't intended to make a statement.
That's fine. That's okay. Thank you.
Your questions are what's important. I just would say thank you to everybody who's contributed to the development of the I would say it's not just the Mayor's transport strategy, it's London's transport strategy, and that includes the Assembly and the Assembly Transport Committee. It's been a very, very good and constructive dialogue.
Thank you. Thank you for that feedback. And then, just before I ask the question, can I remind members that on the left-hand side of their desks, they have a button. And so if they're going to speak to each other or mutter even, that they press that button. Thank you. That would be helpful. Mr. Mayor, can you please explain the changes to the draft transport strategy since it was published for consultation and why those changes have been made?
Thank you, Chair. Val will chip in as and when. The new transport strategy is 20% longer than the draft, and there are key changes in the strategy. In the vision and relevant chapters, we have strengthened the narrative on the opportunities from new technology to ensure that innovations contribute to the MTS outcomes and the public good. We've also, as was asked, clarified Vision Zero so that this applies to the whole transport system. In the Healthy Streets and Healthy People chapter, we have strengthened the narrative and proposals regarding freight, clarified proposals on improvements to air quality and mitigation against climate change to highlight that they will be taken forward as soon as practicable. In the Good Public Transport Experience chapter, we've strengthened the narrative on accessibility and strengthened the section on bus services and bus priority, including a revised map showing the plans for buses in outer London. I know it's a big issue for some Assembly members. We've also strengthened the section on national rail in London, including station capacity, interchanges, train service capacity and rail freight. In the New Homes and Jobs chapter, we've set out the potential route and benefits of a West London Orbital rail line in more detail, added a new section on how extending the tram network to Sutton will support good growth, revised the section around Southern Rail access to Heathrow, including a basis to consider more options with Network Rail. In the Delivering the Vision chapter, we've included a new section on mode shift in Outer London, referring to proposals from across the strategy that will contribute. I'll let Val deal with Sutton Tram and the West London Orbital, Chair, with your permission.
Would you like me to say something about them?
Do follow on, please.
Yeah. We have, obviously, the transport strategy as produced is a photograph of the plans for the future at any time. And of course, there's been work and development going on a lot of potential projects and issues over the year. In particular, we've been pleased to have a lot of engagement with Sutton Council, and we've been looking very hard for the kind of resources we would need to invest in a Sutton Tram. And I'm very pleased that we've been able to upscale and highlight the potential for the extension of a tram into Sutton Town Centre, because it does seem to us now to be a much more realistic project, and the work that's gone on has been very, very constructive. So I think we are in a position whereby we could now be looking at a Transport and Works Act order application as soon as 2020, which would mean a revised, a refreshing consultation before that date sometime. So the Sutton Tram is looking very much more of a viable project, and I think the real value of that project is, of course, that it creates new track infrastructure capacity. Many of the projects we've got, which are very, very good ones, are about intensifying the existing track infrastructure, making better use of it, and that's true of much of the tube. But actually this would break new ground and create opportunities for housing and supporting the economic activities going on in Sutton, much more than just intensifying existing services. But we would hope to do that as well. The West London Orbital rail proposal, you'll see, was a faint whisper in the first draft, but now this is written up as a viable proposal which has very, very strong support from all of the councils along the route. And I'm pleased to say that Network Rail have been expressing support and interest in this. This project would make use of existing underused freight line, where there are about 12 freight trains a day go along the Dudding Hill line. The proposal wouldn't be to lose that freight capacity, but to actually find a way of interlacing passenger capacity around it. And that seems to us to be a very, very viable scheme. And it would give a much needed orbital service around northwest London, and indeed in some ways would help improve access for places, boroughs like Barnet, over towards Heathrow, and provide some fantastic linkages, particularly at Old Hope Common, where you can see both High Speed 2 and Crossrail coming in. So I think the initial work that the West London Alliance did, which has been supported by TfL and Network Rail, has proven to be very, very strong, and we're now looking forward to further developing this scheme. So we felt that those were two very good projects with a lot of on-the-ground support, were viable, and would make a big contribution to doing one of the things we really do need to achieve in this strategy, which is support modal shift towards public transport in outer London.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll now take questions in the following order. Assembly Member Tom Copley, David Curtin, Assembly Member Conservative Group, Assembly Member Prince, and Assembly Member Berry. Let's go with those four. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to you, Mr. Mayor, Val, Mike. Mr. Mayor, I was delighted to see that you have amended Proposal 21, and rather than giving consideration to the development of the next generation of road user charging systems, you will investigate proposals for the next generation of road user charging systems. You will know that in January 2017, our Transport Committee report, London Stalling, said that road pricing will clearly take a number of years to devise and implement, so it is important that the Mayor sets TfL to work on this as soon as possible. Have you set TfL to work yet?
Absolutely. To give TfL credit, and so we can't take all the glory, they were doing some work on this anyway. And can I tell you why it's so important? It's so important because we've got to think about making sure we consider car usage in relation to what time of day you're using it, the emissions you're churning out from your car, the number of miles you're travelling. And we've got to think about how we can make sure people pay for what they use, particularly relevant in the context of government not devolving us the powers we won. And they're already talking about removing from London some of the road tax and not giving back what they take from London. We're, I think, ahead of the curve in relation to other transport authorities around the world. The TfL team are speaking to innovators around the world in this area. If I'm frank, our current focus is getting the technology right on ULEZ. It'll be the world's first ultra-low emission scheme. But that doesn't mean we can't do two things at once. And so we're doing many, many other things, not just looking into the issue of road charging, looking at the issue of drones, looking at the issue of other technology as well. And I'm reassured by the team in TfL. They're working incredibly hard. Let me just give you one example of why you should have confidence in TfL's grasp of innovation. The contactless payment card is the envy of the world. They're looking, we're now giving advice, and we're charging for it now, for spreading this contactless technology around the world. I was told when I became mayor the unlimited hopper couldn't happen. You remember the previous mayor said it couldn't happen. Some of us had fun during the hustings about this issue. Lo and behold, September after the May, we had 2 for 1, a hopper. From January this year, we've had the unlimited hopper. So you're right. There's got to be some political will from the top. But TfL are very keen and enthusiastic about the technology you're talking about.
Well, Mark and I did have a discussion about this, actually, a positive discussion at Transport Committee the other day. And one thing I did say was that we don't want national government to pull the rug out from under TfL's feet and take all the revenue by introducing a national scheme, if they chose to do so, in the same way as vehicle excise duty. Do you intend to have options in place for implementation by the end of your mayoral term? Is that the sort of timetable we're working on?
So you mean
this mayoral term, as in before the next set of elections?
road charging in place?
Road charging, as in options, not an actual implemented system, but options for implementation.
I'm not sure if this technology is there, but I'll let Mike answer that.
Well, yes, I think as I said to you at the Transport Committee last week, I think we're working very hard on all the different types of technology. And just to give people some insight into that, with the risk of repeating myself, but I know not all Assembly members were there last week, clearly the technology now allows you to implement different arrangements by different time of day, by different prevailing traffic conditions or air quality conditions or anything else. The technology is hugely more sophisticated than when we first introduced the congestion charge way back at the beginning of this century, when the position of mayor was first created. So I think what I would certainly like to be in a position to do is to have those options out and about within the next few years, so that then we can consider how they might be best applied going forward. So I think obviously you've got to continue to keep your eye on what's out there in the market, but we are at the forefront of this actually around the world in our thinking, so we'll continue to be so.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, thank you for that, Mike. And I was also pleased to see that Proposal 23 has been amended in light of a Labour group's response to the consultation, in which we expressed concern about different boroughs implementing their own systems and the implication that might have for pushing traffic into other boroughs. And I know that the issues of hard borders are quite topical at the moment, and I was wondering if you could give us some detail on how you would prevent a hard border between different boroughs in terms of different road user charging systems, perhaps between Camden and Westminster, say.
Well, can I reassure Londoners, there are no intentions of hard borders between any boroughs in our greater city, and we've never had border checks or troubles between residents of different boroughs. But what you remind me of, though, Tom, is that, and Mike will know more of this, is actually, if you remember when Ken was first elected mayor, he had a very ambitious plans for a London cycle network. Why? Because you'd be on your bike on a cycle lane in Borough A, and you get to Borough B and the cycle lane stops. And it just, the mind boggled. And actually one of the advantages of the mayoralty, City Hall, working closely with the 33, and I mean 33 boroughs, is we can have joined upness. And I've got to tell you this, the collegiate way the councils of different parties in or out to work together, London councils, we found very encouraging. And hopefully you'll have seen, in relation to the change we've made in the budget, from the original budget, the draft budget, to the additional funding, shows we do listen, not just to Assembly members when it comes to the Transport Committee report, but also to councils as well. But you're right to remind us of the need for joined-upness in relation to this area. It's really important.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Assembly Member Curtin.
I'm just interested in your policies on taxis and private hire vehicles, if I could ask you some questions about that. And your proposal 77 talks about something we've spoken about before, you wanting to seek powers to limit the overall number of private hire vehicles and also to end cross-border hiring. So I welcome that. But why have you not gone further and said that you would actually like to get a bill laid in Parliament and sort of talked about strategies for actually doing that and creating specific new legislation for those changes?
You mean...
perhaps working with some MPs and
Sure.
getting a bill laid, you know, as part of one of the transport bills going through Parliament at the moment.
Well, look, thank you for your question. We have been talking to government about a number of issues. One area where there's been huge progress, and Mike can talk to this, is around cross-border. To give the Secretary of State credit, he was initially resistant to the idea. We met him again and explained the challenges, and he'd done his research between the first meeting and second meeting. And there's now a working group of various transport bodies across the country. So I'm optimistic that working with the government, we can make progress there. The government is resistant at the moment still to the idea of us having the power to cap, but we carry on lobbying the government in relation to that area. I think being realistic, bearing in mind a huge amount of parliamentary time has been taken up with Brexit, and there are very few other bills. We've already seen the challenges we have to persuade colleagues from all parties to support our move to have permitted development rights around rapid charging points. So I've got to be realistic about how much time to invest in a bill that will not go anywhere. But I'll let Mike explain to you the progress we've made working with the government and others in relation to cross-border hiring.
Yeah, I think it's thank you, Mayor. I think it's really important that we refer back to the policy statement that we issued on the 15th of February, because that actually sets out our vision for taxi and private hire, as you know, generally, and how we operate this in the future. And I think overarchingly, it's really vital that we continue to emphasise that this is around first and foremost passenger safety and ensuring that there is a proper integrated approach to ensuring the safety and security of every single user of a taxi or private hire vehicles or whatever else. And I think in terms of the progress on private hire, as the Mayor alluded to, since the discussion with the Secretary of State, I've had some follow-up discussions with officials within the Department of Transport as to how we might properly address the issue of cross-border hiring, because there are some cases where, you know, it's not just cross-border on the boundaries of London with the boroughs immediately adjacent to London. It's actually quite far-reaching, and I think it's therefore a real imperative that as the regulatory authority we have oversight and control, if you like, over the safety and integrity of the system as to how it operates. So those discussions are following up since that much more positive meeting that the Mayor referred to.
Okay. Well, I could ask you about something else to do with the taxis and private hires, which I can't seem to find any, you know, a policy as such about making private hire vehicles pay the congestion charge, and that's something that was spoken about. What's your position on that, and is that why is that not included?
I'll let Val deal with that.
Yes, it's something we've talked about in the Assembly. It is flagged. It has been flagged up. We are actually carrying out the research and doing the preparation, looking at potentially bringing forward a proposal for consultation, hopefully this year. But you do appreciate, you know, there are a lot of factors to consider and that need to be researched and have a secure evidence base, but it is something that we are considering very actively. Just to add to the points that Mike made, there has been a DFT working group on private cross-border hiring and other issues associated with private hire, which Transport for London has been taking a very active part in with other boroughs, licensing authorities around the country. So they will be bringing out a report soon. The other thing to say is that we did engage with Dan Zeichner MP, who had a private members bill on the topic, but sadly that's been talked down and we're not expecting it to make any progress this year. So these are all issues that are in active work is underway.
Okay, thank you. Just one other issue that is of interest to me, and that's the Elizabeth Line extension, which concerns proposals 86 and 87 on page 229. So I know you've got the Crossrail 2 as a future scheme, and you've also got the Bakerloo Line extension and other, you talked about the Dudding Hill Line, many things you want to do, but this seems to be something that's come up just recently, to my attention anyway. I mean, what's the, when are you likely to get around to this? I mean,
So good question. So it's just worth reminding colleagues that in 2010, a decision was taken to reduce the scope and cost of Crossrail 1, which was the compromise because one of the options the government was considering was cancelling the project. And so the extension was supposed to be part of the original. Now it's considered an extension. Obviously, we'd be keen to work with the councils in the southeast of the country and the government to get the extension going. Clearly, when you build these things at the same time, it's cheaper. And one of the points we're making to the government in relation to Crossrail 2 is, of course, you can reduce the scope and have phasing to make it cheaper, but then we'll be having a conversation in 15 years' time about an extension of Crossrail 2.
Well, I understand that the original bill was in 2004. The business case was made that the Crossrail should end in Abbey Wood. Now you're trying to work with local councils like Bexley, perhaps on the basis of building huge numbers of new homes to go with the Elizabeth Line extension, trying to make a new business case to extend it. There's not a business case at the moment to extend it, is there, from Abbey Wood to Ebbsfleet. So, I mean, my question really, which residents are very concerned about, what's going to happen to their houses, is that this is in a long pipeline of projects that you have going. I mean, you're not likely to get around to this for a very long time, are you?
Can I just say that Transport for the South East, which is a political alliance of councils around London, including Kent, which would be the council which would see a lot of benefit from this project, is actually taking the lead in lobbying for this project at the moment. They have a meeting planned in a few weeks to which Transport for London and City Hall are invited to attend. And I think it's very much seen as a southeastern and London project rather than just a London project. So there is work looking at it. It has been looked at from a regeneration point of view by City Hall, and it has some very strong dimensions in it in terms of not just promoting jobs and homes in the southeast, but being beneficial to the boroughs in London. But it is at very early stages, as you say, David, and at the moment we don't have a full business case for it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next question from Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Can I just ask for some clarity before we start? A little earlier you referred to the government's withdrawal of TfL funding and you blamed your predecessor, Boris, for accepting the government's proposals to withdraw the funding. Could you just, for the benefit of others, explain how the Mayor has the power to either accept or not accept the government's decision to withdraw funding?
Firstly, can I thank you personally for your chairmanship of the Transport Committee and through you the committee for the hard work that you've done over the last period. It really has led to, I think, a better transport strategy. In relation to the funding that we received from government, the table I have in front of me goes back to 2012. There have been two CSRs that are relevant to the funding we received. The 2013 spending review, where the previous mayor worked closely with the editor of the Evening Standard, previous Chancellor, and the 2015 spending review, where the same dynamic duo worked closely together for the 2015 spending review. And if you look, for example, at 2012, we received just under £2 billion of government operating grants, 2 billion. We now receive 18-19 0. Now you could argue, as the government does, well, hold on a sec, you've got more devolved business rates. Our business rates 18-19 is 929 million pounds, so we're short by at least that amount from the government. And the point I make simply is, I didn't hear the previous mayor, or indeed you, shouting from the rooftops complaining about this deal. It was a deal accepted with smiles on the faces of both the Chancellor, the previous Chancellor, and the mayor, the previous mayor.
I wasn't obviously on the Assembly at that time, but thank you for implying that I'd have any kind of influence with those two.
I didn't realise you were on the Assembly in 2015. Were you not on the Assembly in 2015?
But I just don't understand how you can infer that Boris had a choice. How do you think he had a choice on whether or not to accept the proposals of the government? How did he have a choice?
So you'll be aware of the agreement reached between the previous mayor and the government in relation to the devolution of the commuter lines. The quid pro quo for this, I'm told, was the devolution of those lines. The government reneged on the agreement to devolve southern, southeastern and southwestern. You'll be aware of this massive cut in our budget. The point I'd make simply is, if you as a mayor are unhappy about what the government is doing, you should say something about it. And I'm disappointed that the previous mayor and some members of this Assembly didn't make the noises they should make, championing and being an advocate for London. I'm not going to make the same mistake as the previous mayor.
Right, so what you're saying is that he silently accepted it, whereas of course you, as we know, are continually criticising the government for withdrawing funding. But of course, as you will also know, that the mayor was very successful in not having any funding reductions on the police and crime area, whereas of course you are now suffering because you haven't had any success on that. But we move on.
Oh, Chair, hold on a sec. Chair. I mean, the question I was asked was my views on the policing settlement. The previous mayor was the guy who was the mayor when our budget was reduced by £700 million, and knowing it's going to be reduced by a further £300 million, and rather than planning for that, was making council tax cuts, not putting money aside. So the idea the previous mayor was prudent, was sensible, was batting in London's interests rather than his own personal interests is ridiculous.
Well, let's talk about what is ridiculous and cutting things, shall we? You knew when you made your, at first your pledge that people would not pay, Londoners would not pay a penny more for their travel in 2020 than they did when you made that promise. You knew that the government was proposing to reduce the amount of money to Transport for London. You were aware of the reduction in the government grant, and yet you still chose to make what turned out to be a partial fares freeze, which has cost Londoners at least £640 million. Are you saying that you were aware or you were not aware of those government proposals to reduce funding when you added to the burden on TfL by making your mayoral promise?
I was well aware of the government cutting London's transport budget by £700 million a year. I was well aware of public transport fares in London being the most expensive in Europe. I was well aware of the previous mayor increasing transport fares in London by more than 42%, and I was well aware of his plans to increase them by a further 13%. And I'm now aware, as a consequence of my Transport for London fares freeze, the reduction in passenger numbers that have been seen across the country, particularly across the commuter trains outside of London and into London, hasn't been seen in the public transport network in London. I'm also well aware now that what the previous mayor said about us not having the technology to have the hopper fare and the unlimited hopper fare was nonsense. And I'm really pleased and proud that most households in London, including those in your constituency, will save, roughly speaking, £200 during my first term as a consequence of my TfL fares freeze. And the numbers of the amount of revenues lost by passenger reductions hasn't been as great as it could have been, but for my TfL fares freeze.
But you, of course, also therefore accept that you're well aware that there is now a projected black hole in TfL's budget. So
the question is, am I well aware, Chair? The question is, am I well aware?
No, that wasn't a question.
Oh, wasn't it? As a speech, was it?
No, that was just a summation
No, that was
of what
just
you
a
said.
member comment.
So do you stand by your manifesto promise, Mr Mayor, that in order to make up for that shortfall in revenues that you were well aware that was going to happen because of government actions on your own, are you sticking by your promise, Mr Mayor, to make TfL more efficient and profitable by not cutting spending to give more capacity or cutting spending on services?
Well, if you don't believe what this mayor says, why don't you listen to what the Commissioner says about that?
So I think, as I've always said, Chair, through you, that we must be judged on our results. Last year, we reduced our operating costs under the Mayor's leadership by 153 million. That's the first time ever, month by month, we have reduced our operation spend across TfL since Transport for London was formed in the year 2000. This year, we'll reduce our like-for-like costs again. In fact, we're expecting at the end of this month, which is the end of the financial year, to over-deliver on our planned savings by some 200 million, which has more than offset the impacts of external factors that has meant there's been some softening of income, largely as a result of some of the terrible events we saw last summer. But as the Mayor said, actually, increasing evidence that slight softening of demand has been cushioned from a London perspective quite differently from those train operating companies serving London. The budget for 2018-19 details how we'll continue on the trajectory of savings, actually to achieve an operating surplus for the first time by 2021-22. So I have to say, Chair, if I may through you, I don't recognise the term black hole in finances. We are statutorily obliged to produce a budget and a business plan that balances in terms of its spend and income levels, and I am very pleased to say that the team has produced that, and we are on a trajectory to get to an operating surplus for the first time by 2021-22.
Just on that, if I may, Commissioner, that budget figure is supported greatly by a 30% increase in revenues that you're projecting, in spite of the fact that at the moment the trend appears to be a reduction in passenger numbers.
I think, Chair, it's important, if I may, just to emphasise the scale of investment we are carrying out in London's transport network, and therefore the increased capacity that you get, and therefore self-evidently the increase in revenue you get. So you will notice in our numbers that next year there is a slight increase in real terms in spend. That's because obviously when you bring in a new railway the size of the Elizabeth line, you have that upfront spend that actually predates by some small time period the revenue effect that you get that. If you think that on 45% of our network, that's the District Circle, Metropolitan Hammersmith and City line, we're increasing capacity by over 30%. That is significant. If you think about the plans we've got to spend 1.5 billion on the next phase of tube modernisations on the Piccadilly line, where we'll see a procurement decision by May, and then leading on into signalling systems and Central Line and Bakerloo Line following. The Piccadilly Line alone will see a 66% increase in capacity there with all the revenue opportunities that creates. The Northern Line extension, some 595 million being spent, money on major stations to allow more people to go through those stations, sometimes capacity constrained at the moment, some 310 million pounds. So actually there's a huge combination, and that's before you even get to the really important work on Step 3, where under the Mayor's leadership we've increased the accessibility spend to now stand at 216 million over the plan years. All of this contributes in very real terms to new additional demand and revenues coming into our situation. So if you look at our spend, it has to be looked at in the context of all the revenue that then generates.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. I'm very grateful for that answer. But the question was actually about the Mayor's promise not to cut spending on better services and more capacity. That was the question, which the Mayor has not answered.
Oh, so I'm sorry, Chair. I think the Commissioner just explained the increased capacity, and so I'm not really sure what the criticism is.
No, I'm not making it. I'm asking,
question.
Will you stand by your promise, your election promise, of making TfL more efficient and more profitable, and that will not be as a result of cuts to spending on better services and more capacity?
So the phrase I used, Chair, was good but flabby. Not about the previous Mayor, but about TfL. And what the Commissioner has shown is how we are becoming more efficient, reducing operating costs, and more passengers using the underground services, the buses, London Overground, and the trams. So I'm really proud of what we've achieved over the last 2 years, and I'm really excited about the plans going forward.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any more questions, Assembly members?
No, I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Assembly Member Berry.
Thanks very much, Chair. Good morning. Nice to be talking about transport here today. I'm a bit overexcited about the fact that I'm talking about transport, so apologies if I go on a bit. One of the things that's in here that disappoints me a bit is the lack of a vision for a much more car-free central London. Because I think what we've got here is we asked you in June 2016, my colleague Caroline Russell asked for a traffic reduction target and a clear plan to meet it. There is an overall London-wide traffic reduction target up to 2041, but central London is already way ahead of this. The mode share in central London is 95% non-driving. Your target is for 80%. So can I ask, will central London be allowed to slip back? Can we set separate targets for central London for traffic reduction that get us closer to, 100%? Can we see more plans than the transformation of Oxford Street, the transformation of Parliament Square, in terms of specific traffic-free streets? Other mayors are doing this, and we really would like to see more targets towards this and more ambition in the plans. I asked a question to the Mayor, really, because it's about vision, but...
Sure. Well, listen, I mean, thank you for your question, Charlotte. Thank you for the chivying that you do in relation to this area. We've got to be ambitious, and actually, so the Mayor's transport strategy is the most ambitious it's ever been, but it's realistic. So the previous transport strategy, you'll be aware, had a target for, I think, 63% or 64% of people walking, cycling, or using public transport by 2031. And you're right, we're doing incredibly well. We're doing incredibly well because most of the 33 boroughs get it. TfL can't do it by themselves. And so we've got to have separate aspirations for different parts of London. And so you talked about Oxford Street, and I think we can get a bit blasé, assuming it's mission accomplished. This was talked about in the 1970s, and it's still not over the line yet. Parliament Square is a long way further away. One of the things we set out in our document is the ambition to have town centres that are low emission zones by 2020. And that means working with town centres across all 33 boroughs across London, increasing the attractiveness of people walking and cycling. If you look at Will Norman's plan in relation to cycling, he's not obsessed just by the importance of segregated cycle lanes in central London, but also about quiet ways, about the 25 different routes in outer London as well as in London. And what you'll see in the business plan we publish later on this year is more details about outer and inner London. But also what you're going to see is staging posts between now and 2041. Because this is a strategy for 25 years, but it's not an unreasonable question for you to ask, well, what's the route map and what are the staging posts along the way? So when we publish the business plan later on this year, you'll see staging posts, and so you can hold us to account. Okay, great. So in the business plan, we're going to see separate targets for different parts of London and also interim targets on the way up to 2041. Let Val come in a second. What you'll see in the business plan is in particular... I'd like to move on to another topic if that's all right. But that's useful what you just said. That's really helpful. You've answered your own question, but if that's what you want to do... Yeah, no, I'm just confirming what you just said. It's not what I said, but what you said. I also want to ask about road pricing with the rest of my time, and I don't have very much, but I do think you could have got on with this much sooner. I think experts agreed when we were running for mayor that there was a need for this mayoralty to get on with developing plans for something smarter, something fairer, something more extensive than the congestion charge zone on its own. I think the hopper and the fares freeze, they came in isolation. They do leave you open to accusations of, if you bring it in now, using drivers to fill a gap. And I don't think that is fair, but I think it could have been a planned integrated transition if you'd got going when you were first elected. So we're here now. So I want to know what in your remaining time as mayor you're going to do to make sure that a fair scheme of traffic demand management is established both practically and politically. I think the practical case is made, but practically and politically is the right thing for London. Can I just check, your question lasted 1 minute, 12 seconds. How long do I have to answer it? 2 minutes and 42 seconds. So let me ask that question in the time that I've got. I'll bring Val in as well. I think your criticism is without foundation. I think TfL have been working on technology from before I became mayor. They are world leaders when it comes to innovation and technology, not just the C charge in the early noughties, but the contactless payment, the other work they're doing. Look at data. The work they're doing on data is the envy of the world, sharing the data. in relation to using the innovation of entrepreneurs, innovators, investors, and people who are tech savvy. But I'll let Val come in to rebut the criticism implied in your question.
Yeah, I just want to say that, you know, one of the most important things that we've got to do with the next generation of technology is make sure that it is future-proofed, because part of the whole concept of the plan is that we're taking London through changes and a transformation, you know, and the very urgent need was to tackle the air quality issue. But whatever technology goes in for the future, it will potentially need to change some of its objectives and purpose, particularly as technology changes. So there's been work going on that for some time now, and that is continuing. So, you know, have no concern about that. It definitely is going on, and we can start to surface it at some point. I just wanted to say a point about local traffic reduction targets, because the strategy sits across the whole of London, and what happens now is that for the 95% of roads that the boroughs run, the boroughs have to bring forward their local implementation plans, their local transport strategies, which has to sit inside this. And we've just agreed a set of local implementation plan guidance with the boroughs. So Councillor Julian Bell and myself have both put our names to that guidance, and at the heart of that is actually boroughs having proposals to bring forward traffic reduction strategies and deliver the kind of healthy streets transformation that is in this strategy. And so the two things are very much linked.
I just want to say one final thing on the road pricing issue, if that's okay.
Sorry.
I mean, you know, to be fair, we should have been pushing on this much sooner. When we were running for mayor, we were given guidance, you know, confidentially by TfL about where we could get to in the next term, and we could have got to the point of a mayoral decision by the end of this year if we'd have got going as soon as we took over. I am worried you're going to leave this up to your successor, that it'll continue to be a political football as the Conservatives are trying to
Okay, you've come to the end of your time. Assembly Member Berry.
Just make a
Assembly
speech
Member
instead.
Pigeon, thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I just thought on International Women's Day, we should pay credit to Deputy Mayor Val Shawcross for her work on this strategy and at TfL. I've only got 3 minutes, so I'm going to be very brief. Your strategy, lots of it I welcome. There are a few areas that I have concerns about. Really welcome that you want to get people 80% of all trips by foot, walking or public transport. But we are currently seeing cuts to the frequency of bus routes across London, including the RV1, which I'll be presenting a petition on earlier. It also features as a photo in your strategy. You say bus services are going to be redistributed from inner to outer London. Can you give me some actual examples where you've improved and actually expanded the bus services in outer London, please?
Firstly, your question has a sweeping generalisation which is wrong, which is bus services being cut.
Some frequencies.
I'll let Mike give you the detail to rebut that generalisation that's wrong. Mike, do you just...
Yeah, so actually there are 66 bus routes in London where we've been increasing frequency or increasing the times of day where we run the peak type services or adjusting services. That covers a whole wide range of services across the city. Of course, it is true that there are some parts of the city that, because we have now got the most reliable journey time speeds on the bus network that we've ever had in terms of reliability measure, that does give you the opportunity, as bus-on-bus congestion is reduced, to remove some bus services, actual number of buses on certain routes. So, for example, as you know, because I raised the example at the Transport Committee last week, on Kingsway, we've got something like 100 buses per hour running up and down that line of route. Clearly, on routes such as that, there is a real issue of buses impeding other buses. And as you ease the traffic flow with the 120 bus priority schemes, for example, that we've been delivering across the city, you give the opportunity for services to be adjusted. You used the example of the RV1, where of course there are alternative routes, both from Tower Gateway to City Hall and from City Hall to Waterloo. The bus hopper allows the interchange between bus routes that would not have been possible before, and it's quite appropriate, therefore, that I think we have a look on a route-by-route, case-by-case basis about those routes. But also it's the case that when you get to outer London and new developments in areas such as Thamesmead, in advance of rail links being established, and the same is true sort of Wembley, Acton, Old Oak Common areas, then you actually can enhance the connectivity locally in parts of outer London before you get the rail links that were referred to earlier.
Those are the plans with developments, but have there been any increases in outer London
Yes,
currently?
Yes, there are.
That are noticeable. Well, perhaps you could provide me with a list of those so I
have
share
the list.
that
I'd be very happy to
information.
do so,
They're
yeah.
on the TfL website.
Right, and I mean there are numerous petitions and today being presented about some cuts. But what I wanted to know about is, I have asked you this before, but will you start to look at how you can consult Londoners about changes to bus timetables, particularly if more are coming up? And can I also add to that, will you look at how you market buses? Something I raised with the Commissioner last week, looking at how, for example, you could market things to tourists. These are good routes for tourists. The RV1 is a good example, but number 11, here are places you could stop to look at tourist things and maybe have an app that TfL could work with others on to perhaps generate some more income and passengers.
That's a lovely idea.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, I think I responded to that.
I'm going to claim it though if it's a success.
We can jointly claim it, that's
actually,
great.
But I think just to reassure you, actually, even since we talked last week, I've asked the team to just explore that because I do think it was a fantastic suggestion. So, yeah.
Lovely, thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank you, Assembly Member Pigeon. Assembly Member Twycross.
Chair. Mr Mayor, we previously asked you to outline whether TfL roads will match the 20s plenty speed limits some boroughs have already adopted across London. We're grateful for your commitments in Proposal 9 to consider 20 miles an hour as part of all new schemes on the Transport for London road network, and that TfL will look to implement 20 mile an hour speed limits on its streets in central London as a priority, with implementation being widened across inner and outer London as soon as is practicably possible. Does this mean every single TfL road will become 20 miles an hour?
Thanks for your question, Fiona. This is really important. I've been a key advocate for 20s plenty from when I was an MP and as a local resident and as a councillor as well. Just worth reminding ourselves the number that Val said. 95% of the roads in our city are controlled by the boroughs. We control 5, but roughly speaking, 35% of usage, almost 40% are on our roads. It's really important. There are some roads where it's not appropriate. For example, if you think about the dual carriageways, the A13 is example, the A3 which I know. So those roads you will not see being reduced to 20 or even 30 because safely you can go much faster speeds. But you're right. The TfL road network in particular parts of inner London, there's no reason at all why they shouldn't be 20. So we're working towards more of our roads being 20, and we're also talking to the boroughs, because what you wouldn't want to see is our roads are 20, but the road next door, because it's borough run, is 30. The good news is most drivers will change their behaviour and drive at 20 anyway. And so by a process of us doing it first, it will change behaviour. But basically, nearly all of our roads in central London, inner London, will probably be 20 miles per hour in the near future.
Thank you. And we know that a number of TfL roads in central London are currently participating in a trial of 20 miles an hour speed limits. When will the results of these trials be published, and will you be conducting similar trials in outer London, notwithstanding the point you made about the dual carriageway roads?
Well, in relation to, I'll let Mike come in, but in relation to, going to say, Transport for London roads that are suitable, I'm not sure there's a need for a trial. For me, the evidence is there. But I'll let Mike deal with the detail about some of the other roads.
Well, we are monitoring you're quite right, we are monitoring the impact at the moment. It's the early signs are very positive, and I think we'll obviously get the full report published as soon as we can. But I think the Mayor is absolutely right. There is incontrovertible evidence around the benefits of 20 mile an hour, just in terms of the instances of people being killed or seriously injured in the comparison, as you will well know. So we're absolutely determined to pursue this.
And can I say one more thing though? Let's not put all our eggs in that basket. We've also got to think about design. And one of the things I've been impressed about by TfL in the recent past is the work they're doing about design. And Will, Norman and Val are doing lots of work around road junctions, how we can design our roads and design our city so it's more pedestrian friendly, cycling friendly. You've heard about the 120 bus priority routes, but we are doing lots of work around designing our cities so it becomes safer. The Zero Vision plan will be published later on this year.
Very soon, yeah.
Thank you.
If I may, I think the Vision Zero strategy for the roads, which the Transport for London Board have also been working on recently, we hope to get this out, I think, before the summer. And speed reduction as a component of danger reduction will be a very crucial part of the Vision Zero strategy. and the tests, the trials you talked about, will be feeding into that. And I think you'll see a plan for 20 mile an hour rollout. We ought to be able to get that as part of the Vision Zero strategy that will be published. But it's interesting, if you look at the 20 miles an hour map of London as it is now, there's already quite a considerable area of London which is 20 mile an hour. So the boroughs are definitely voting actively to transform residential areas of London into 20 miles an hour, and I do think we need to see more of outer London, and certainly more of the most dangerous roads, which is often where the red routes conflict with people. So those high roads that are also red routes, we need to tame them if we're going to ever hit the target.
That's really welcome. Thank you very much.
Okay. Apologies, Val. During your reply, the building decided it needed to vent itself. I wish it would do it quietly. Now, Assembly Member Cooper.
And it's delightful to be talking about the emphasis that this transport strategy has on in terms of living streets and healthy streets. And I'd actually like to pay a bit of a tribute to the work here of Living Streets, who've actually done a lot of the work in encouraging boroughs, certainly persuading Wandsworth, to move to having 20 miles an hour. But I wanted to ask you specifically about Proposal 24, which relates to the area that the Mayor has really prioritised in the transport strategy, about the ultra-low emission zone and the low emission zone, because obviously cleaning up London's filthy air is such an important area for us. The Environment Committee and also the Labour Group were very keen to see the central zone brought forward in implementation, and that's something that's coming forward to April 2019. We really welcome that. And then the London-wide emission zone for heavy vehicles in from 2020. So two aspects to that. Why are we not extending that out to all non-compliant vehicles, not just heavy vehicles, so cars, vans and motorbikes that are non-compliant? And is there any chance that that could come in 2019 instead of 2020?
So you mean for the entire London office?
For the low emission zone, yeah.
So we've done some quite detailed consultation on these plans. You'll appreciate that if we don't get the consultation right, not only do people feel excluded, but it leaves us open to challenge. And, so it's important to get on board good ideas people may have. The good news is the consultation in relation to the central London area, the C charge area, went very well. Lots of support for the ULEZ being brought in 2019 in that area. By 2020, you're right, for lorries, coaches and buses, it'll be all of London. And we're consulting now on 2021 up to the north and south circular for all vehicles. Let's wait. That's not fit. Let's wait and see until we've analysed that data. I would say this though, because there's a question asked at previous Mayor's question time as well. I looked at the data, and as a consequence of the plans we currently have, 96% of the road network in outer London, 96%, would comply with legal limits by 2021. So, as a result of the plans that we have. So the obvious question is what if you did a cost-benefit analysis, what is the benefit in relation to everything, bearing in mind we're talking about 4%? Question, can we use targeted initiatives to get the additional 4%? And the other point I make is this, Leonie. I've now seen from the toxicity charge the benefits across London of the T charge. What do I mean? Fewer of the most polluting vehicles coming into central London, which must mean fewer driving in outer London as well, because it's not the case you park your car and then jump on the tube there. So similarly, if we get more of the cleanest vehicles in the C charge area, so that's Euro 6 stuff, more of the cleaner vehicles up to the north and south circular, I think the impact will be all of them benefiting from that. I've got to be cautious though about this, which is you rightly are impatient for change overnight. I've got to consider businesses in relation to changing their fleets overnight, but also the police, the fire service, London Ambulance Service. What I wouldn't want is inadvertently them having to pay huge costs to change their fleet overnight or in a very short space of time, or them using taxpayers' money, or for those private companies, small businesses, their profits to pay fines, and I'm trying to get the balance right between the two.
I mean, as you'll appreciate, because I mentioned living streets, so a lot of people contact me, Mums for Lungs, Dads Against Diesel. There's a plethora of groups that are very, very hungry for change to be as early as possible. And I think it's really important that we can release as much modelling that shows why the boundaries have been chosen and why the balance is being set where it is. Because I think a lot of people, and it may also be because I represent constituency in South London, and obviously people look at, there is a bit of an asymmetry between where the North Circular runs, which is through outer London boroughs, and where the South Circular runs, which is through inner London boroughs. And people say, you know, what about Tooting Broadway, just as one example? What are we going to do to clean that up?
No, and can I say this? My response to that is, firstly, thank you to Living Streets and all the campaigners who lobby us. It's a healthy democracy that they do so. But we're not just relying upon the T-charge and the ultra-low emission zone. The plan that we have, the 12 most polluting parts of London with the worst buses. You know, we've now got in low emission bus zones. One of them benefiting, your patch. Look at, for example, what we're doing in relation to more people walking and cycling. Look at the audits taking place outside schools. The most polluting, the areas the schools are in have illegal air. The work we're doing in relation to that. Look at the monies we've announced in the environment strategy to green up those parts of London which have the worst quality airs. Look at the new air quality monitors that'll go out very shortly that we're procured for as a consequence of monies that we secured all across London. So rather than fiddling with the monitors, as some alleged that some previous mayors did, we want more monitors. Look at the air quality alerts we have on the bus stops, on the tube stations, so people know when the area is bad. Look at the advice we're giving to those who are burning the wrong sort of material in their fires to make sure we don't have that as a cause for the bad. So there's a lot of things that we're doing in relation to improve the quality of air, including the world's first ultra-low emission zone.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Rowan. I do think the launch of the T-charge since October has been a huge success, and I look forward to this building on that work. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Shaw.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mayor, my question is on proposal 34, which is about electrical vehicle charging infrastructure. We are concerned that people won't buy electrical vehicles until the charging infrastructure is in place locally. We feel that there's need for a clear message from you with regards to proposal 34, that boroughs will be expected to put this infrastructure in place first to help drive the switch to electrical vehicles. You say that you are committed to working with boroughs to provide on-street residential charging. How do you plan to convince reluctant boroughs that they need to introduce such infrastructure in the near future?
This is such an important question, because unless consumers have confidence about the ability to charge their vehicles, they're not going to buy them. And that's why it's really important to give them the confidence. Let me give you the good news. The numbers of Londoners with electric vehicles is going up. The number of charging points is going up. And what we've done is we've given local authorities the funding, I think it's £4.5 million, to install the electric vehicle charging infrastructure. A number of boroughs already are installing them. I think there's been 1,500 standard charging points installed in the recent past. You've seen the stuff, the charging points in lampposts, really encouraging and exciting. Val has been speaking to Julian Bell, who's the lead for London councils, and can talk about some of the progress made there, as indeed Mike can. But I want Mike to tell you about some of the rapid charging points progress we've made. So if you remember, when I first became mayor, there were 0 rapid charging points that were TfL. There were a handful of other rapid charging points. Why are these important? Because it takes half an hour to charge your vehicle with a rapid charging point rather than the numbers of hours it takes on a normal charging point. And the numbers for rapid charging points, I think we're now more than 100.
Well, we've got 83 TfL ones, 49 exclusively dedicated to taxis, and most of those are so far on TfL land. So I think that echoes the point the Mayor you're making around how we need to continue to work with boroughs to ensure that that is opened up there. As the Mayor implies, as well as Val, I had a very constructive discussion with the Transport Environment Committee and Julian Bell in particular on that committee just 2 weeks ago to ensure that we continue the momentum to get get these rapid charging points in place, and actually it's gone up slightly, Mayor, in terms of overall charging points, which are now around 2,000 across the city. So we have to continue to make this investment to give people confidence. Of course, it's also true that new vehicles, as they are being manufactured and as technology improves here, that the run times for vehicles, both in terms of distance and in terms of time that they remain fully charged up, is increasing all the time. So, we have to also look at that in that context as well as technology continues to emerge. But I don't want that to in any way sound complacent. We have to continue with this effort. This is a hugely important point for us to ensure that we have credible plans here.
Thank you for that. I would like to sort of press upon the point that there may be some reluctance in boroughs. I don't know whether you've come across that for whatever practical reasons. But if that is the case, how do you seek to overcome so that we have the sort of strategically located charging points to make electrical vehicles?
So let me give you some of the examples of some of the challenges we have. So some local authorities are worried about losing a parking space if it's given to charging. And so there are innovative ways of making sure that doesn't happen, but the reality is there are some parking spaces may be lost. But the benefits are humongous if we get it right. Not everyone's got a drive they can plug their car into. If you live in a flat, it's a real issue. That's why we've got a role to play in strategic oversight of London, because there's no point if, for example, some boroughs, I'm just making this up, in the west of London all said no, and there were charging points here because what happened to the residents there. So we need a panoramic view of London to make sure we've got most of London covered. And we've made huge progress with the rapid charging points. If you include the non-TfL ones, we've got more than 100. If you did a graph of the increase in our rapid charging points, the graph is more steep than any other city in the world. No one's made the progress we've made in the last 18 months, last 12 months in particular. And we want to keep on doing that progress. But you're right, it means talking to councils, persuading them why it's the right thing to do. I'm sorry, the council's concern in relation to the rapid charging point was they can look ugly, to be frank. And so it's a conversation we've got to have. We've got to speak to the manufacturers to make them less ugly, take up less space. But these are conversations that we have to have because what we don't want is sort of, if you like, 2G, 3G technology at a time we need 5G technology, which is what the rapid charging points bring.
Thank you.
Assemblymember Devenish.
Budget plenary, Mr Bellamy promised to write to me on the point that we were discussing earlier with Mr Assemblymember Prince, that your budget is predicated on the 30% passenger projections. Could you chase that letter up? Nothing's been received, please.
Sure.
Thank you. Can I move on to Mr Brown? Did you read the FT and the Tony Travers articles about your budget black hole? And are you really saying it's credible that you'll have a 30% passenger increase? I appreciate you have some capital projects, some major ones going on, but 30% is a huge hole to fill.
But I think I've always said that we should be judged on the evidence of our delivery, which is why I made the point. I won't repeat the answer to Assemblymember Prince's question earlier on, but it is important that you look at the evidence of what we have delivered, which is that since the Mayor was elected, every single financial period we have reduced operating spend on London, Transport for London overall. We have also, in that time, continued with the investment programme to ensure that we deliver that increased capacity to allow these new journeys to take place. Let me just give you a little bit of context. In the year 2000, just as one example of one of our operations, London Underground carried 2.5 million people on the busiest day that year. Now, we carry 5 million people nearly every day on the London Underground network with exactly the same estate. What we have done, what we've changed, is we've followed through already investment in lines such as the Jubilee line, the Northern line and the Victoria line, where you've got modern signalling systems with, for example, 36 trains an hour on the Victoria line, on the Northern line, as recently as a couple of months ago, an increase in the evening frequency of service, benefiting some 250,000, allowing some 250,000 new journeys by extending that window of full operation in the evening peak. So actually, where we add capacity in, we are getting new passengers in. So the evidence of the past is absolutely clear, and that's why I'm confident with the investment programme that I outlined earlier on and the spend on that investment programme, and including, of course, very importantly, the delivery of the Elizabeth line, that we will get those numbers achieved.
Tony, can I just have 30 seconds just to reassure you, hopefully?
No, please don't, because I want to move on to another question. I'm short of time, so thank you. In your document, moving on to Mr. Khan, please, there's no mention in the whole 300 pages of driverless trains. We've discussed this before, and you talked about safety concerns. Do you want to reflect on what you've said? Are you really saying it would be unsafe on the Victoria, Northern, Central and Jubilee lines, please, Mr. Mayor?
Why don't I let the expert answer, the Commissioner?
No, I'd rather you answer, because you actually made the point on safety last time, please.
Firstly, it's Mayor Khan to you, not Mr. Khan. And secondly, I'm reassured by the expert advice I received from the Commissioner. I'm just surprised you're worried to hear from the expert.
So I would just say that actually often we are accused of describing our network as unique. In this context, it is unique in that the London Underground network has single-bore, deep-level tube tunnels, unique amongst the metros of the world, where other metros of the world have tracks that run alongside each other, where there is easy access to other trains. I'm afraid I lived through the terrible events of the bombings of 2005. And I have to tell you that the bomb on the Piccadilly line, in particular on a deep-level tube train, made me absolutely convinced that we need properly well-trained staff on every deep-level tube train in London. I've always said that. I've been on a consistent record of saying that. And whatever the technology advantages of automation, and by the way, the lines you described do operate automatically, but they do still have a highly trained, highly effective member of our team on board, of which I'm hugely proud of their competency and capability. And my view remains very strongly that as long as I'm doing this job, I will fight to ensure that continues.
I'll leave it there. Thank you.
That's a shame.
Okay, Assembly Member O'Connell.
The mentions of the Sutton tram, and I thank Val for her introductory comments. It's been something of a 10-year uphill struggle to try to deliver this project, and we're still not there yet, clearly. So I welcome very much the mentions within the document, and also your announcement, Val, particularly that you're working towards a Transport and Works order in 2020, or by 2020. Really, first of all, I'd like to understand for you, Mr. Mayor, first of all, to reiterate your commitment to the Sutton Tram extension, but also, can you tell us a little bit about how this will be funded, i.e. what has changed from previously?
No, thank you for your question, Stephen. Thank you for your lobbying as well, which has been very persuasive. So it's on page 233. You don't have to go to it, but 233 of the MTS has the details in relation to that. Both Mike Brown, the Commissioner, and Val, the Deputy Mayor, have spent some time in Merton and Sutton speaking to the respective leaders. If you remember, the concern I had was the shortfall. Roughly speaking, a £300 million project, we can contribute £70 million. It was the gap. And the good, the figures may not be exact, Steve, but the good news is the conversations that Val and Mike have had with the councils, but also some of the ideas we have can help fill that gap, we think. And it's really important that the councils understand the responsibility they have to try and meet the funding gaps. We think by early 2020, so before the election, we want the relevant orders up and running and stuff.
I think all I would say is that I think the figures have moved over that 10 years I've been looking at it, and we started off at a scheme of 300. The figures that I had is more like 400, 450. Each delay that we have increases that gap. So again, I would urge you to bring those councils forward. The fact of the matter is, historically, it has been difficult to get positive responses from those councils. So I'd like your last comments really around that.
One thing I would say is that we are all the time looking for external funding sources to help boost these kinds of projects. And it's been very good that Merton and Sutton have been working together so very, very closely. And one of the key areas of collaboration is obviously looking at what the development potential is along the route, because that's one of the ways in which we liberate resources, including government grant. So one of the game changers on this one is that the government has announced a second round of housing and infrastructure funding, or is it HIF? HIF money,
Yes.
and that we think this project would be a very, very good applicant because for the right size, the right timescale, and increasingly looking like the right kind of opportunities to develop homes. So, you know, it looks to us that we could make a match here, and the government would probably welcome it as part of their commitment to housing, as well as our own, obviously, our commitment to housing.
Clearly,
so that's the kind of thing that we're doing.
I understand.
All the time we are actually scanning the airwaves, looking for ways to fund these projects.
Well, I'm glad things are moving on in a better fashion. I understand homes and jobs will be the key to unlocking that funding, and we will continue to keep lobbying.
And Steve, your active help and the help of all of your colleagues cross-party
yes.
In lobbying for support for any government bids we put in for this and other projects will be very effective. So I think this is one we can all work together on.
Duly noted. I will do all I can. Thank you.
Assembly Member Boff.
Where does, Mr Mayor, where does your transport strategy take into account the contribution that motorbikes can make to reducing congestion and pollution?
There is a section in here that deals with motorcycles, which I'll hopefully one of my colleagues will find. But there is a section in here. Motorcycles, of course, there was an issue in relation to emissions that you referred to. Also an issue in relation to safety that is referred to in the report as well, which I'm sure Val and Michael will find shortly, if you bear with us. But I can answer your next question if you want in the meantime.
I can talk to you about motorcycle if you wish.
Yes, it's specifically on their contribution towards reducing congestion and pollution.
Okay,
I'm sure it's in there, I just can't see it.
So we know there's about 100,000 motorcycle trips a day in London at the moment, but it does seem increasingly there is a lot more businesses using them for delivery. So the first thing to say is that they are nonetheless motorised transport. So if you're looking at a healthy streets approach, which is about promoting active transport, you know, walking, cycling and public transport are the priorities. However, given that, as you say, because of their relative road space efficiency, if businesses want to use motorcycles, our commitment is to try and make sure that they can drive them in as safe an environment as possible, and that we want them to be driven in a safer way as possible.
I appreciate what
so
you
in
think,
terms of
but
the mode shift hierarchy, that they're not a priority as such, because they are still motorised transport. However, we want to make sure that people who choose to use them are safe.
So that is that in the strategy?
The healthy streets approach is very clear. It's walking, cycling, public transport.
So when I asked, where is it that motorcycles within the strategy can refer to that they can reduce congestion and pollution, there is no reference to that. Is that correct?
Page 69.
Yeah.
Okay.
Proposal 11, which has 5 parts to it.
Yeah. And it says what?
It says, call on boroughs to allow motorcycle access to their bus. Well, it's quite long. I mean,
the bus lanes thing.
It's got 5 different parts to it.
Okay.
I can read it to you if you like, but it's a whole page.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
And we've also, in the LIPS guidance, we have said to the boroughs, not just that we would like them, where it is safe to do so, to allow motorcycles into their bus lanes, but we would like them to make provisions for things like secure motorcycle parking. So again, this is a key issue for many motorcyclists in London, and the high rate of thefts.
That's not a
So, you know, it's about looking at how we can offer support to the motorcycling community and the businesses that use them in a sensible way.
I think on the page that the Mayor refers to, sorry, without prolonging it, it does explicitly refer, as you will see, to two-wheel vehicles contributing to a significant role in low-impact freight and servicing trips, because one of the things we had previously discovered was the proliferation of white vans and other vehicles moving around the city weren't always being very effectively used in terms of the number of parcels and packages they might be carrying, and motorbikes clearly have some sort of role in that.
And there's also, just to reassure you, Andrew, a section that says, especially where these vehicles, motorbikes, the trips are made by ultra-low emission motorcycles. So there's a whole page there, but feel free to get in touch if you're not happy with.
Yeah, it's just that I didn't find it very apparent. It's just that prior to the election, Mr. Mayor, you wrote to the Motorcycle Industry Association, and you said it's clear motorbikes and scooters generate far less pollution, save time and money for the rider, and don't create congestion. It's absolutely right for us to enable powered two-wheelers to play their part in delivering a less congested road network. I just don't see that in the transport strategy.
Well, reread that page, which you didn't know existed, and then come back to me if you're still unhappy.
But you've absolutely explicitly, in one of the sections, said that you want to discourage the use of motorcycles. That doesn't, for me, doesn't square the circle from what you said prior to the motorcycle industry before the election.
If I may, Chair, I think
you are discouraging people using motorcycles.
There's a difference
That's
between
correct, is it not?
People using motorcycles for essential delivery journeys, for your plumbers going to a job with your tools, and people choosing to commute where actually there's a good public transport alternative. The issue is about the purpose of the journey, I think.
The issue, yes, that's
and
lovely.
As far as possible,
that's
we
great.
do want to promote
You're eating into my time. That's great.
Transport.
But the importance, I think, is down to the driver, not to yourself. And it's clear to me, is it not, from the Mayor's statement prior to the election and the transport strategy, there is a mismatch. There just seems to be one. You're discouraging motorcycle use in the transport strategy, and yet the Mayor was encouraging it before the election.
This is the first time there's ever been any strategic statement about motorcycling within TfL,
yes, and
within
it's
the Mayor's
discouraging it.
within the City Hall, and the purpose of these statements are to make sure that where people choose to motorcycle, they can do so safely and they have supportive
facilities. Is it not fair to say, Ms Shawcross, that you are discouraging the use of motorcycles? Is it not fair to say that you are discouraging the use of motorcycles?
I would say that the key plank, the key objective of the Mayor's transport strategy is to promote healthy streets, i.e. that people should walk, cycle and
specifically exclude motorcycling from those categories. You're discouraging motorcycling.
A motorcycle is not walking.
Yeah.
It's not cycling. It's not public transport.
So you're discouraging motorcycling. That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Thank you very much. No, that's fine. That's all I need.
You're trying to put words into the Mayor's mouth.
Let's move on. Assembly Member Bailey.
I've got what I need. Very much so.
Good morning, Mayor Carr. We know you're fond of that term. I don't need
you
to tell me.
Sadiq, Sean.
I do not want to. I'm allowed to call you Sadiq. Yeah. Love it.
No,
love
excuse me. No. Let's not get carried away. Please, I'm going to ask Assembly members to refer to the Mayor as Mayor Khan. Okay. And I would ask the Mayor to refer to members as Assembly members and their titles. And that way, we don't have then any problems. Assembly Member Bailey, please put your question.
In my defence, I did call you Mayor Khan.
Good,
so let's
thank
start
you.
there. Do you agree that a strategy document ought to have KPIs and other key interim targets to clearly examine how effective and that strategy has been enacted?
So what we're seeking to do, Assembly Bailey, by the next business plan, which is later on this year, is to make sure there are staging posts. Because my worry is, we've got this 25-year plan between now and 2041. Only some of us will still be here in 2041. We need staging posts so you can mark the progress. So in the business plan we publish later on this year, I hope to set out what the expectation is between now and 2021 in relation to the movement from people to walking, cycling and public transport.
I acknowledge your answer, but wouldn't it be more useful to Londoners to have that in the strategy so that the strategy is more than a PR document? That's the worry, isn't it? That it says lots of nice things, there's lots of great stuff in here, but without KPIs and those targets, how do we know it's working? Many of these things are going to be delivered after you leave. because just the way things are to take long. We need those clear indicators. Are you happy that there's enough clear indicators in this strategy?
It's a 25-year strategy. I'm not quite clear how you'd have a KPI for 2031 when none of us will still be here.
Well, you have interim KPIs.
Oh, that's what we're going to publish. So we'll publish. That's the point I'm not sure if you understood the point I was making, which is a new point, which is in the business plan we publish later on this year, we will set out what, between now and over the 25-year period, what the expectation is in relation to the model shift. That addresses your point, and the reality is KPIs usually occur in short measures, so you can see whether the key performance measures have been met, and you can then hold the person to account. What we seek to do is explain how we get from 63-64%, for argument's sake, to 80%.
I understand that, Mayor, I understand that point. But obviously, we're trying to scrutinise this strategy. And when it says things, if you look at the section Vision Zero, which is about bus deaths, it basically says you're going to seek to make all vehicles on the road safe. Of course, we know that's going to happen. Everybody wants that. But how and when and at what pace is vital to Londoners to know. Are you happy that there's enough detail around that?
Okay, you're out of time. Thank you. Assembly Member Dismore.
Mr Mayor, I'm pleased you've expanded proposal 49 in the strategy to mitigate the effects of noise and vibration caused by the tube and other rail services. But the World Health Organisation recommends a 40 decibel limit for noise. Why doesn't such a limit appear in the strategy as recommended in the Labour Group response?
Well, can I thank you for your question? I'm going to let Mike Brown, the Commissioner, deal with this point, but can I just make the point that it's valued the advocacy you've done for your residents in relation to this issue, the meeting you organised where these issues were raised, and I take it very seriously, because we've got to make sure that we aren't making Londoners' lives miserable as a consequence of the noise. And you have been an advocate for those who can't sleep at night, whose lives have been made really poor as a consequence. And so I take this very seriously, and the Commissioner does as well. So I want to respond directly to your point about the WHO guidelines, but also what we're seeking to do to ameliorate the concerns that you've raised.
So obviously we're aware of those guidelines and we're aware of the issues, and I would just reassure all Assembly members, including yourself, that every single issue that we continue to get, such as they are on night tube noises, we will continue to explore what we can do. This is a challenging science, as I know we've had conversations with you before, or my team has, around that often if you are able to mitigate noise in a particular part of the track form by some additional insulation or noise suppression processes, that then you find that there is because of the way that small narrow tube tunnels work, there can often be a resonant effect elsewhere on the line that then creates an additional problem elsewhere. So this is a continual process that we have to go through, but I'm very well aware of this. It is a real concern to me that residents, even one single resident, is being disturbed by noise from the tube network, and we continue to tackle those, and we're very mindful, as the Mayor said, of this World Health Organisation.
I asked this because I've had many complaints from residents living near the Northern Line, as well as the Jubilee and Victoria lines, are suffering from unprecedented noise problems well above 40 dB. On the Northern Line, for example, I've been told this has been caused by a combination of automatic trains braking at exactly the same points, causing extra corrugation of the rails, leading to the noise and vibration, which is then transmitted because of the new rail's profile fixed to concrete sleepers with no damping in between, which transmits the noise worse, which was designed and installed under the previous mayor, who didn't seem to think about this. And the problem's compounded by the night tube, which prevents people being able to sleep at all. TfL's Northern Line engineering gangs, for example, can retrofit noise dampening pads at the rate of about 100 metres a week, unless they're called away for other emergency work, which is often the case. For example, at Mornington Crescent, they're 6 weeks behind now, the retrofitting programme. But as the work involves stretches in Camden up to 1 kilometre long, it can take many months, indeed years, at the present rate for these problems to be identified and then addressed. So will you look at employing additional engineering gangs to enable this remedial work to be done more promptly?
Well, I think, if I may, Mayor, just pick that one. I think what we will do is continue to prioritise those areas that are of particular concern. And I know you have been, on behalf of those you represent, very, quite rightly, vociferous in raising these points with us. And I'm more than happy to have a further review of the programme of work that we've got, and to assess whether we need to bring in some additional resource to tackle those particular hotspots.
Well, that's helpful, but prioritisation, I'll give you an example. We just had a meeting at Kentish Town. The complaint started in September last year. The retrofitting won't be completed, even if everything goes to plan, until after September this year. So those people and obviously didn't complain straight away, waited over a year, will have waited over a year for something to be done. Yeah. And that's the problem. I mean, the Mayor's given a very clear commitment to try and deal with this effectively and promptly, but on the ground, because there aren't enough engineering crews, it's taking far, far too long.
Well, I'm happy to take that specific point away, of course, and have a fresh look at it. And the overall point is a well-made one, that we will continue to explore this, and we'll work with you, and we'll have some further conversations with you on the detail of those points raised, for sure.
Okay, thank you for that. Assembly Member Eshalomi.
Good morning, Mr Mayor, Val and Mike. Mr Mayor, Policy 12 of the strategy states that you will ensure that public transport level fares are set to enable accessible, affordable travel for all Londoners. We really much do welcome this, especially when you've alluded to the fact that your predecessor set fares that over 40% in cash terms and 13% after inflation. What do you actually mean by affordable?
Well, in my first term, it means freezing the TfL fares, and that's what we've done. And the context is, as you said, a 42% increase in the previous 8 years. And just to remind you, the reason why the travel cards can't be frozen is because, unfortunately, the government and the privatised rail operating companies who make huge profits still increase their fares by huge amounts, on average 5% in the last increase. So our proportion of the travel card is frozen. The privatised TOCs haven't frozen theirs. So, I mean, in my first time, I mean, freezing TfL fares, that saves the average household in your constituency £200 over my first term. By affordable, I mean the hopper fare, 2 for 1 from September 2016, from January 2018, unlimited bus travel within the hour. The Freedom Pass is affordable. By affordable, I mean making sure we run a tight ship so we can carry on providing the Freedom Pass as long as I'm Mayor, but also the concessionary offers we have. The taxi card, the service will carry on as it is. So when I say affordable, I mean making sure Londoners can afford to use public transport in the context of when I became Mayor in May 2016, most expensive public transport system in Europe. It's really important to make it affordable. And the final point I make is this. If we encourage more people to walk, more people to cycle, it's even more affordable because it's free. And that's why we're encouraging more people to walk and cycle at the same time as improving public transport to make it more attractive to those who want to use public transport.
No, and we definitely support you in terms of trying to get more people to walk and cycle, but the reality is that some people can't. Today, being International Women's Day, just celebrating all the carers, the majority of whom are women. But the reality is that carers still don't have free travel, and they may not see travel as being affordable in London. We've called for you to implement this, so just wanted to know why and when this could be implemented in the transport network.
Well, can I tell you what I'm pleased to inform you is I've asked TfL to look into whether it's possible to provide a companion, a concession, who have difficulty using public transport independently. And so that's what TfL have been tasked to go away and do, and I'll hopefully report back as soon as I can about the feasibility of doing so. Clearly, you know, had there not been the annual £700 million cut from our budget, it'd make it easier for me to do so. And the question that's worth asking is, how is it possible that in the last 2 years, for 2 years in a row now, for the first time in the history of TfL, we've managed to reduce operating costs at the same time as freezing TfLs, investing in increased capacity and making there more step-free access at stations. And so, in addition to all that stuff, I've asked TfL to see if we can make it possible to have a concession for those who help those who otherwise couldn't use public transport by themselves.
Right, that's good news. Thank you.
Assemblymember Shaw, did you want to come back in?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mayor, you just mentioned accessibility and step-free provision. Your strategy explains that 26% of tube stations are step-free now, and that 40% will be step-free by 2022. Your long-term objective, you state, for the majority of tube work is to be step-free. Can you define what majority means to you? Is it 51%, 99%, 100%, or in between?
Well, it's not 50.1 or 51. But it's a really good question, because public transport should be what it says on the tin, which is transport for the public. And many members of the public are disabled, have issues with accessibility. And I want to pay tribute to the hard work that Val has done in this area. In the context of the budget we have and the savings we have to make, what Val has managed to do is to find £200 million. And that is the biggest investment in step-free access in the history of TfL, which means we go from 23% when I became mayor to 40% by the end of the business plan. But also we've made sure the 4 big transport interchanges in inner London are already done: Tower Hill, Vauxhall, Tottenham Road and Bond Street, which is so important when it comes to getting around our city. But it's not simply going, and by the way, I want to go way above 51. We want to go way, we want to go to the top end. The good news, 100% of all the stations in the Elizabeth line will be step-free, 100%, all 40. Good news, 91% of our bus stops are currently accessible, step-free. 100% of our buses are step-free. And we're doing more work in this area. But it's not simply step-free, Shah. We're also doing work around the paving. We're also doing work around the loops. We're also doing works around other stations being as accessible for disabled people as possible. One of the works that Val has pioneered is hidden disabilities. And it's worth just talking about some of the work we're doing there as well, Val.
Yeah, we've tried to take a strategic look at disability access generally in the strategy. So, rather than just doing the things that are kind of easy to reach, actually look at what is needed. So in terms of the step-free access stations, you'll see that they are mapped around trying to make access to those public transport networks kind of fairly and evenly spread about London. And when those stations are done, and indeed as all stations are looked at, we want to make sure that there are other facilities like here in Loop, the Mayor's mentioned, but also that things can happen like the training of the staff is there to respond to people who have learning disability needs. And indeed, we've had some, I think, very successful campaigns. I'm really pleased with the outcome of the Please Offer Me a Seat campaign, where we've basically encouraged the public in general to be understanding of the fact that sometimes people have an issue such as, multiple sclerosis or a cancer or some sickness that means it isn't so obvious that they might need a seat, but they can wear a badge and be offered a seat. There's a lot of people who've got hidden disabilities of a variety of nature. So we've tried to look, in the round, but also very geographically about how we can make the whole system accessible to people.
I have a follow-up question, if I can have a very brief response to that. How many stations, in your supporting statement in the strategy, you say that some locations will be very difficult to retrospectively make step-free because of the age and layout of the original station. Can you tell us how many stations fit into that category, if you have the number? And has TfL estimated cost of making the remaining of 60% stations step-free?
You mean post-2022?
Yeah. So first, how many difficult stations do you have, just the numbers which fit into category of, that whether it's age or the status or whatever?
Well, I can't give you the exact number, but I can certainly follow that up with you, because clearly there are some locations where actually at street level, it doesn't coincide with where the platform or the ticket hall is, and those are quite technically difficult. But then, having said that, frankly, the announcement we made in January of this year with 13 further stations, some of those had previously been considered by somebody as not being deliverable in this context. So actually, we continue to exploit and explore other opportunities there.
It would be useful, given that you made a clear statement in the strategy, to know how many stations fit into those difficult categories.
Absolutely.
And have you costed? Have you had a step at costing for the remainder of 60% of stations to make them step-free?
I'm sorry to cut across the Commissioner. Don't forget, technology is moving so fast, but also economies of scale brings the cost down. So by us saying we're going to invest £200 million, we've managed to encourage the private sector and our engineering to reduce the costs. And similarly, I wouldn't be too downbeat if, for example, the current advice is some of these stations are too expensive. Don't be surprised if by 2022, 2023, some of them become affordable in the context of the constraints of our budget. So I'm very optimistic.
We also do take what opportunity we can as the GLA through Section 106 on planning agreements to put them in place. And because we've now got a strategic map of where the most desirable, interchanges and changes are, where you can get best impact in terms of the passengers that need this. It really helps, so we can identify the really high priority ones. But if you think about it, if it happens, for example, that on the central line, which tends to be quite problematic, you can get a spread of accessible stations along it, because the bus service is 100% accessible. It is possible for people to, if they can't access at this station, to access at the next station and get a faster journey overall, even if it isn't yet 100%. So the objective is to really make a thoughtful intervention into speeding up the journeys of people with disabilities.
No, I accept what you say, but I thought that it would be useful to have some idea of scale, magnitude of cost, for the large 60% that remain. But thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Before I call the next speaker, can I welcome to the chamber pupils from Broadford Primary School and pupils from Havering and Mead Primary School, and welcome to this plenary meeting where the Mayor of London, the Deputy Mayor of London and the Transport Commissioner are taking questions on the transport strategy. This is a plan that you will inherit. And from what we are hearing, it's going to make the city much, much better place for you. Okay. Possibly, my deputy says. But I'm much more hopeful it will make your city a better place. Okay. Assembly Member Sahota.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mayor, good morning. I'm referring to your proposal 100 in the strategy, which says you will promote an improvement of surface links to London's airports. We know that Heathrow, City and Gatwick airports can be accessed by Oyster and contactless. Do you have any plans for extending this towards the other London airports?
Well, I'll let the Commissioner respond shortly, but can I just say, it's worth us recognising what an achievement it was to get Oyster and Gatwick. I mean, City and Heathrow probably you'd have expected that, bearing in mind they're in the confines. But that is a big achievement in relation to Gatwick. So the obvious question is, we've seen the improvements made to the quality of life for the travellers to Gatwick and visitors and families and stuff. Question, why not Stansted and Luton, which is when I hand the ball over to the Commissioner, because it's a difficult question. He'll explain to you the conversation with DFT and the airport operators. So.
Well, I think the Mayor is absolutely right that Gatwick is a particular challenge because of its geographical location, sort of up beyond the London boundary, and something unprecedented. However, the evidence is incontrovertible about the benefit that it has for people arriving in a very important gateway into the city, and actually the very ridiculous situation we had before where people would queue up and buy one type of ticket at Gatwick and then have to do the same when they arrived at our Victoria Underground station shortly afterwards. So I think on that basis we are considering to review, particularly because Stansted have got some quite ambitious plans in terms of their development programme going forward. Of course there's Luton, there's Southend Airport as well, who continue to lobby on this matter as well. We've got to keep it under review. It is complex because it does go beyond our formal fare zone process and therefore requires special arrangements to apply. And of course it's very important to me that in the context of affordable transport for everybody that is not getting caught up in above inflation fare increases on an annual basis as well. So that's something we're looking at, but technically I think we can do it. It's just a matter of whether we can cement those conversations both with the individual airport operators and with the government.
Good, thank you. And my next question is, of course, on policy number 22. When you say that you're happy for Heathrow Airport to expand as long as the air quality doesn't get worse around Heathrow. And I think that we should have a great aspiration of increasing the surface links to Heathrow and press for a air quality improvement in the area, regardless what happens with the Heathrow expansion issue, right? That we should be pressing for air quality improvement and improve the surface link to Heathrow. Would you agree with that comment I made?
Absolutely. Can I just be quite clear about this? You know, I'm not anti-Heathrow. On a better Heathrow, what I'm against is the expansion in the context of a new runway, particularly bearing in mind the concerns that we have in relation to air quality. Yes. Put aside for a second noise and the other issues. And I think there are so many unanswered questions how people are expected to get to Heathrow. I mean, as it is now, we were at people's question time in Hounslow, but around parts of Chiswick and West London, the air is illegal. And the two causal factors are transport from the roads, M4, M3, M25 and the A4, and then the airport. And so the irony is this: the airport may be trying to bag the progress we've made in cleaning up the air to argue their case that it doesn't lead to an amelioration of poor quality air, so we've got to keep an eye on this. But the Commissioner tells me the sums don't add up in relation to the expectation of how people are supposed to get from other parts of London and the country to Heathrow with the current budgets that they've announced.
I think that's the point. The point is that our assertion very clearly is that the Davis Commission recommendations on Heathrow allowed on day one of an expanded Heathrow for public transport to be viable, but literally only on day one. So as soon as that materialised and it grew to the possible capacity that you would get, quite frankly, the risks for air quality, the risks for the environment, the credibility of the public transport options to the airport just do not stack up. And it's really important, I think, that we continue to explore, for example, as referred to in the strategy, other rail links to Heathrow, even in a non-expanded sense, actually, to address the issues that the Mayor quite rightly identifies in parts of West London, so that we can ensure that public transport is the choice for people going to the airport almost exclusively, but much the way we see with some other airports. I mean, the DLR servicing London City Airport does that quite effectively, and there's actually quite a high proportion of rail journeys to Gatwick.
Thank you, Commissioner. And of course, Valerie, you were about to tell us your views on the KPIs when we ran out of time. I want to hear about them, please.
Yes, I was going to say that the scorecard, which is about to go to Transport for London Board, which you will all see, has a selection of the very most important KPIs, which are based around delivering not just a healthy and financially sustainable organisation, but delivering the Mayor's transport strategy. So we've worked very carefully to make sure that those key performance indicators tie into the transport strategy. And as the Mayor said, by the time of the business plan, we should be in a position to provide much more detail about forward interim targets. I just remind those of you who've been here as long as I have, I'm trying to remember who they are now, that Munir Mirza got herself into a little bit of trouble because she published a cultural strategy which had a lot of detailed interim KPIs in it, and then of course as they needed to change the KPIs because sometimes you do better or a bit worse than you expect, they actually had to change the strategy, which is in this case, which is a legal strategy, quite an onerous process. So, you know, it's kind of quite important that those KPIs and those interim targets work for us and do deliver the Mayor's transport strategy. So putting them out through the TfL board, through the business plan, and monitoring them very publicly, and actually they also play into the performance-related pay component that staff get at TfL is really important to make the transport strategy become a real delivery document over time.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so that's the last of the questions from members to our guests here this morning. So thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Brown, for your attendance here this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, now we go to part B, and I have to read something into the record, so bear with me. And that is the Assembly notes the draft transport strategy. Now, thank you. Oh, thanks. I've received an amendment to that, so I want to now call on the proposer to the amendment, and that is Assembly Member Prince, to move his amendment.
Thank you, Chair. I want to start by making it very clear that we're not looking for the Mayor to amend his ambitions in the strategy. I think it is fair to say that it's a very ambitious strategy, and it's a stretching strategy as well. I think we'd all be very, very proud if by the time we got to 2041, if the Mayor was able to actually fully achieve all that he sets out to achieve. But that's how the strategy should be. If you don't reach for the sky, you won't miss the trees, will you? So it's not a criticism on that front. I want to make that very clear. But when you do look at the detail of the strategy, that is when the problem occurs, because there is a real lack of detail on how we're going to get to where we're heading. I mean, it is very laudable that we're looking for 80% of all journeys to be by foot or cycle. That's great, but there's not a clear route as to how we're going to achieve that. You know, it's very good that we're going to have no deaths by buses by 2030, no deaths at all on our roads by 2041. Of course, we'd love that. We'd love it sooner. Of course we would. But there's no route to how we're going to get there. There's not what you might want to call KPIs. There's not the targets. There's not a matrix. Interestingly though, there is, when you look at other sections, there are matrices which make it very clear. When we look at disability and serving that area, there's a very good graphic in the Mayor's strategy which shows how things are going to progress. And I think that's really what Londoners deserve, really, is something like that for all the sections. Because at the end of the day, and I thought the Mayor was particularly generous in what he said to me and the committee, and I'd like to echo those words that he said in thanking all the committee here that worked with me to help the Mayor in producing this strategy, and also to all those guests that we had. We had some fantastic guests come who made some really good contributions. But in order for us to help whoever the Mayor is, because I certainly won't be here in 2041, and I don't suspect even Mr. Mayor will be here either at that time, whoever it is, we need to help him to achieve those. And the way we do that is by scrutinising what is happening in the now, not in the future. And we look at what is being achieved now. And if we have no means by which to measure that progress, clearly we can't see if we're on target, because you can only be on target if you know in which direction you're going. So this really isn't about, it's really not criticising the ambitions of the strategy. It is purely saying, can we have some detail, please? Can we have a route map on how we're going to get there? Can we have some infographics, a matrix, so that we can help the Mayor to achieve this ambitious strategy?
Thank you very much. Can I call upon Assemblymember Bacon to second the amendment?
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Well, that was a gung-ho bravura performance from the Mayor this morning. The strategy, well, there are some good things in it. There are some things in it that I don't like at all, but that's not the point of this amendment. As Assemblymember Prince has just said, the point of the amendment is to try to make the Mayor's strategy clearer and make it easier for the Assembly and Londoners to hold the Mayor to account in delivering it. The Deputy Mayor, Val Shawcross, just talked about the scorecard that's going to the TfL board apparently next week or the week after, and that this would give KPIs that would tie into the transport strategy. Well, those Assembly members who've been paying attention for the last 2 years will have been very familiar with hearing that kind of sentiment. We've heard it from a number of deputy mayors and senior mayoral advisors at countless committees that there will be KPIs coming, KPIs coming, KPIs coming. There aren't any for anywhere across the board, and we've been here for half of the mayoral term. So, you know, to be honest, that claim from Assemblymember Shawcross, from the deputy mayor, forgive me for treating that with some scepticism, because we've been promised these things before and they have absolutely not been delivered. As Assemblymember Prince has just pointed out, it is the Assembly's duty, it is our reason for existence to hold Sadiq Khan to account. We can't just give him a blank cheque and assume that everything's going to be okay by 2041, as he would like us to believe. If we do that, we are negating our duty as elected Assembly members to hold him to account. We are giving him a blank cheque if we don't do that. So I hope that all Assembly members, having thought about this, will see why this amendment is here and will feel able to support it.
Thank you. I'll have speeches now with no longer than 5 minutes. Assembly Member Copley.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can I just confirm that these are on, not just on the amendment, but a general debate? Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Thank you very much. Well, I'll start with the Conservative Group's amendment, and I'll thank them for giving us sight of it in advance. Assemblymember Prince and Assemblymember Bacon said that this was just about putting in some KPIs and targets, and I think all of us around this table would agree that we like mayors to set themselves targets by which we can measure them. But I do believe that the effect of this amendment, which, by the way, does say we call on the mayor to rewrite his strategy, would be to have us to essentially throw the baby out with the bathwater. And we would lose a good strategy on the basis that we do have, I think, cross-party some issues when it comes to some of the measurements within it. So we in the Labour Group won't be supporting this amendment. And just to do a bit of comparison, actually, between what's in this strategy and in the previous mayor strategy in terms of monitoring outcomes. Sadiq Khan has expected outcomes. There are 10 main ones and 21 below that. And progress on these outcomes will be reported annually in TfL's Travel in London report. Boris Johnson, by contrast, in his previous strategy, had 7 goals and 24 strategic outcome indicators. So actually, we're not looking at a great deal of difference in terms of what's being monitored between this strategy and the previous one, which I believe the Conservative group supported. In fact, in 2009, there was actually a motion tabled by former Assembly member Jenny Jones precisely on the subject of targets. And when I looked into the minutes of that meeting, it turns out the Conservative group didn't stay in the room to vote for it. They walked out and made the meeting in quorum. So I think there's a little, as they were wont to do at that time, although this is before I was elected to the Assembly.
We like listening to you.
So, did that make all the difference, Tony? I think there's a little bit of a lack of consistency here. And the Mayor has made, I think, some important changes, particularly within his main overall goal of 80% of journeys being made by walking, cycling or public transport. Although there aren't interim targets, as the Deputy Mayor for Transport explained, they do now give a range for each mode share, which is, I believe, something that all parties on the Assembly wanted the Mayor to do. So I will turn now that we've addressed the amendment to the strategy itself, and first of all echo what's been said by both the Mayor and other Assembly members about the work of the Transport Committee, which I chaired, of course, by Assembly Member Prince, which I do think does some of the best work on the Assembly, and I do think we make a real difference in terms of improving what the Mayor does. And this is an ambitious vision. I'm glad that Assemblymember Prince recognises that. There's support for major transport improvements such as Crossrail, the Northern Line extension, Crossrail 2, the Bakerloo Line extension, and of course the Rotherhithe and Canary Wharf crossing. It's also a strategy that, although it addresses the key issue of keeping London moving, also addresses other issues such as air quality and climate change. And I really welcome the investment that's going to go into the Healthy Streets approach. And of course, the improvements to air quality, the commitment to improving air quality through the ULEZ, the T-charge, and to making London a zero-emission city. I think it's an ambitious vision. I think it will be difficult. I think it will be a tough challenge to achieve, but I think it's right that the Mayor sets himself a tough challenge. I also want to point to some of the improvements that I think we've seen that reflect the response that the Labour group has put in. As we discussed during the questions with the Mayor earlier, I think it's a very positive thing that the language on road pricing has been firmed up, not just in terms of that he will now commit to investigating proposals for road charging systems, which I think are an inevitability and vital to the future of London, but also this coordination as well between boroughs, so that we don't end up with these hard borders between boroughs that do or don't adopt a particular system. There's also better wording in there in terms of 20-mile-per-hour limits on TfL roads, and indeed more numbers and indeed targets, which I think the Conservative group will welcome, on ultra-low emissions vehicles.
Final statement.
So, thank you, Chair. So we won't be supporting the Conservative amendment, and we will be enthusiastically supporting the Mayor's vision for transport in London.
Assembly Member Berry.
Thank you, Chair. So, first of all, on the strategy itself, I think you heard some of my criticisms earlier on about the way I think it just has a little bit of a lack of vision, a lack of political courage on some of the more difficult things that a mayor might be called upon to do in terms of transport. And I think that is fair criticism, and he should have been getting on with it. This is the mayor's job. There's good things in it, though. The healthy streets approach is something Greens have talked about for a very long time. It's a really strong basis, the hierarchy that the Deputy Mayor was talking about earlier, of focusing on walking and cycling and then public transport, and then your motorised things, starting with motorbikes and all that. That is absolutely correct. There are traffic reduction targets in there, and as Assemblymember Copley laid out, there is at least a commitment to investigate, which is a much stronger word than look at or consider. So I think we are working our way towards what is inevitable, which is a fair system of distance pollution-based road charging, and that's really, really good. I can't vote for this strategy. It contains the Silvertown Tunnel. Can't vote for anything that contains that, and it's not my strategy. But I think those are constructive things that we can say. On the amendment, I think the amendment makes a really good point. We would like to see at least one more interim target within this strategy than I'm going to do all this by 2041. I think we have, through the arguments that have been made, and possibly the threat of this amendment, won some concessions today. We've been promised in the business plan very clear targets for as soon as 2021, as well as stages on the way to the 2041 targets, and we've been promised targets for different parts of London on the traffic reduction, which I think is really useful to hear as well. However, the process for giving us the interim targets, at the very least, I take the point about not putting too much detail into the strategy, but at least the process for giving us the interim targets and for monitoring in that way could have been laid out in the strategy itself, and it ought to have been changed. I think, on balance, I'm going to abstain on the amendment because it isn't my wording. I did ask for some changes. An early update to the strategy, an addendum to the strategy would be useful to see, but I think it's served its purpose in getting some concessions out of the Mayor today. So.
Okay. Assembly Member Pigeon. Oh my God.
Thank you very much indeed. I have to say there's a lot of good stuff in this transport strategy, and especially compared to the previous one. I think bringing back in the idea of having some priority in terms of different modes of transport, the hierarchy which was taken out by Colville Ranger and Boris Johnson, was a really regressive step. And I do think that we should, pay tribute to the work Val Shawcross has done that, and the work from our Transport Committee for the last 8 years that has fed into that, as well as recent years, because some of the sections in there, including motorcycling, came directly from the work that we did on the committee when Val co-chaired it with me over the last 8 years. So I think we have really influenced it. I like the ambitious target, 80% of journeys, cycling, walking, using public transport by 2041, the Vision Zero plans, the progress on road pricing. Gosh, that's a shift in the last 6 months. And again, really powerful report we did as a committee, which actually has put that subject back up there clearly on the agenda. The really strong support for the Sutton Tram, which we've heard time and time again, but actually really feels like we might be getting somewhere. The Bakerloo line extension, Rotherhithe to Canary Wharf Bridge, pedestrianising Oxford Street, Crossrail 2, walking cycling. I mean, there's some great stuff in there, stuff that many of us have been calling for many, many years. But clearly there are some things in there I don't like, and that's inevitable. And there are things that I raised in my own submission. The Silvertown Road Tunnel is one of them. I do not support building more road tunnels in London. And I think given that the Mayor's doing so much on tackling air quality, this really is a contradiction sitting alongside it, because it will cause more pollution in London. I still don't think we've got to the bottom of some of the issues around cycling. What does the sort of high quality cycle route really look like? What does it mean in practice? The section on freight has been watered down, something that is of concern, and maybe something Transport will look at later in the year. And I do want to see, I'll come on to that in a minute, some of these sort of intermediate targets spelt out a bit more. We were promised a tripling of protected cycle space by 2020. This was promised, I think, to the London Cycling Campaign. I'm not sure that has properly been spelt out, and there's no detail on any expansion of cycle hire to Rotherhithe and Bermondsey, which is desperately needed, particularly if we have the bridge built. The bus network, I'm still not satisfied that we are seeing a real boost in outer London as we've been promised, and it'd be interesting to see the letter that Mike Brown sends following my questions earlier. So, you know, good things in there, some areas that I'm concerned about, and because of things like Silvertown Tunnel, I wouldn't be able to vote for the strategy just because I have a clear position against that. And the Conservative amendment, yes, I'm very sympathetic to that, but you're basically rejecting the strategy on that basis. And I think, given what we've heard today, and given that, I think it's interesting, the scorecard, it's the first time they've mentioned that. Last week at Transport Committee, they talked about the business plan is where you're going to have the clear targets as well. I think we need to maybe have a briefing on that, get our heads around that, ask for things that we want as an assembly that we think we should be using to measure whether they're delivering this strategy, not just having it directly from them. And I think that is probably the best way forward that we can, and how we can hold the Mayor to account.
22 of them. Assembly Member Boff.
Thank you. I've been trying to understand the Labour Group's position as outlined by Assembly Member Copley. I mean, first of all, he criticises the consistency of GLA Conservatives. I don't know that that's a reason for voting against something that you might believe in. I mean, if you wanted to do that, just come and join our group. We're continually arguing about whether or not we're being consistent in our group meetings. So that's something that you might want to entertain in the future. But you also said, curiously, you said that we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Well, that's precisely not what we're talking about. We want bathwater. This poor child is never going to get clean because there is no bathwater. There is no way of achieving the aim of cleaning the child because there are no KPIs, there are no routes to progress, they are just fine words. Now, you know, I don't sit on the Transport Committee, thank goodness, really. I like housing, thank you very much. So I can speak objectively here. I always get worried about Transport Committee, like Assembly Member Berry. I'm a bit out on a limb here. I think the Silvertown Tunnel is a mistake. That's not a reason for, I don't think that's a reason for voting against the entire strategy. That is throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But then again, I've always believed that people should be charged on the underground on how well dressed they are. But that policy of mine has never been achieved either. But the point is, we want a mayor to do things, not just talk about things. And actually, within what Assembly Member Copley said, he said, of course, we do support you. We do support the idea of KPIs, but we're not going to vote for this motion, even though that's exactly what this amendment is about. We do support the idea. We realise that the Mayor is frightened of KPIs, is frightened of the commitments, is frightened of being judged in the future by his words, and yet you're going to oppose a motion that actually holds him to his word, that measures the sincerity of this transport strategy by asking him whether or not he will actually achieve it and how he's going to do it. To not support this motion says, quite frankly, that you don't really believe the words. They are just words. I will be supporting this motion and opposing a bunch of words without a way of getting there.
Assembly Member Curtin.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the Mayor's strategy
says, as I agree with Assembly Member Bacon and his position, it says some things that we agree with and some things that we don't agree with. Particularly one of the things that we've spoken about in the debate here is the issue of road pricing. This would have immense implications for civil liberties if people are driving in their cars and some state agency was able to monitor them everywhere they went and charge people an amount of pounds, an amount of money for where they go. This is a complete redefinition of the relationship between the individual and the state. And anything in this strategy which redefines that relationship in such a fundamental way, which could erode our civil liberties, which have been built up over 800 years or more, is something that we cannot vote for. So that's one thing that we feel very strongly about. But as for the motion proposed by Assembly Member Prince and Assembly Member Bacon, I do agree with that. We do need some performance indicators, steps on the way to targets which he has for 2030s, 2040s, perhaps even 2050s. The mayor's in office for another 2 years, maybe more, who knows. But we need certainly targets for 2 years' time, because he might not be in office after the 2020 elections, and then we won't be able to assess what he's done. So I do agree with that motion. We will vote for that motion, and happy to support you in that. Thank you.
Assembly Member Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make a few small comments, mainly about what Assemblymember Copley said. A historic defence of poor practice is no defence at all. The Mayor has long passed the point where he can start pointing fingers about what the other guy, to use the Mayor's term, has done. We are interested in what this Mayor has done, what this Mayor is doing. This is not a strategy. It is not a strategy, because a strategy would have KPIs and key indicators that we could check it against. The function of this body, this august body, is to hold the Mayor to account. If he does not give us the means to do that, it cannot be done. So as much as he's your Mayor, and I'm sure you're very proud of him, your elected position means you must push him to give us these opportunities. I will praise the work of the Transport Committee and the Environment Committee and the region as well, because the Mayor has formed, all three of those committees have forced the Mayor to give the small concessions he's given around KPIs. If the AMs in those meetings didn't push him, we'd have even less to grab hold of. So while we let the Mayor get away with this, he will continue to do this, and we will be failing Londoners, all 8.9 million of them. Love the strategy or not, what we all need to do is have something to compare it to. I'm sick of hearing talk of the other guy. That's a deflection. What is this guy doing? What is Mayor Carr doing for our future? At this point, this document stands as a lovely piece of PR, and without KPIs, that's all it is. And we shouldn't have to wait for the business plan. We're not talking about the business plan, we're talking about this strategy. We've been asked to consider this, and with nothing to consider it against, it is just a PR document. And I repeat, the Mayor has form on this. Every committee I sit on has had to push to get any kind of KPI around any of the nice statements the Mayor has made. So I will be supporting our amendment, because it is the right thing to do. It's not a party political thing, it's the right thing to do. To give the Mayor this easy ride is something that your conscience will have to have a look at. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, any other speakers? No. Okay. Are there any other amendments? No. Thank you. Let's move to the vote, but before the vote, let me just say this. As members will know... Oh! Thank you. Summation. Can I call upon Assembly Member Prince for his summation?
Oh, thank you for calling me to... Madam Chair. I haven't really got very much to say, but I would like to just say that...
Well, I knew this, that's why.
Yeah, you read my mind, and you have my deepest sympathy if you did.
It didn't take long.
Surprised you didn't even work it out. I think it is disappointing that other groups, with the exception of UKIP, aren't able to support this amendment. It wasn't done as a political thing. It very much as no, it doesn't actually, and I think you're using a minor technicality there, Tom. It doesn't reject the strategy at all. It doesn't say anything about rejecting the strategy. It's just asking him to put in some KPIs and so on. And I think that it is a shame because, as the chair of the committee, one of the consistent themes that came across from all parties was this lack of detail, this lack of a pathway for the strategy. I know that none of us in here agree with everything that's in the strategy, but it is fair to say that it does have ambition, and some of the things in there I would very much like to see. I'd like to see them sooner than later, but nonetheless, we are going to find it very difficult as a committee, and my successor will find it very difficult as a committee to have even a clue as to if we are or if we are not on track with the Mayor's strategy. Because in theory, he doesn't have to do anything until 2041. There are a few exceptions to that, but a lot of the aspirations are at this long, long time in the future, 2041, and there's no pathway. And therefore, we won't know at any point whether or not we're on target. And I think it is very regrettable that, as I say, with the exception of UKIP, all the other parties have expressed these concerns, both to me privately and also publicly, that they don't feel able to support this amendment. But there we go. So I'll leave it in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Okay, we're going to the vote now, but before we go to the vote, as members will know, under Standing Order 3.19, any motion proposing rejection of a strategy requires 2/3 of Assembly members present to vote in favour in order for that to be carried. Any other motion requires a simple majority of votes to be carried, but is not binding on the Mayor. Let us be clear, the proposal, and that's for clarity, the amendment before us does not propose rejection of my call on this is that it does not propose rejection of the strategy. But we will vote now on the amendment. Votes for the amendment, can I see?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 for, Chair.
10 for. Can I see those against the amendment?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 against, Chair.
10 for, 10 against.
And you have an additional casting vote, Chair, if you wish to use it.
Isn't that interesting?
Bit of power. Bit of a power.
Let me just glow in the power. Being International Women's Day and all and everything. No, my additional vote will be against the amendment. So I can give you the vote, and that is votes for 10, those against the amendment 11. So we go back and let us now vote for the motion in the name of the Chair that the Assembly notes the draft transport strategy. Can I see those for my motion?
That's 11, Chair.
11. Can I see those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's 11, Chair.
11 chairs. This another moment of basking in my power and glory. Let's just go straight to supporting my own motion. Right. So, and no, I can do those sums. So we end up then with a motion that noting the draft transport strategy has been agreed That concludes the Assembly's consideration of the draft transport strategy. Thank you so much, members. But we've got now more business, so then let us get on with petitions. Can I ask Assembly Member Desai to present the petition listed on the agenda in his name?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I have three petitions. The first petition is about traffic calming and safety measures around Stepney Green Station. And on advice received, I will now proceed to read the prayer out in full. We, the undersigned, call on Transport for London to work with our Hamlets Council to change the traffic light sequencing and introduce safe pedestrian crossings where Mile End Road A11 crosses both Globe Road and White Horse Lane. Currently, this junction is extremely dangerous for pedestrians as the traffic flows prioritize vehicles and there's no time for pedestrians to cross safely, let alone a formal crossing point on either side of the road. Whilst we recognize the junction is busy for vehicles, it is also a crucial crossing point for local residents, being close to Stepney Green Station, local schools, and numerous shops and businesses, including a Co-op supermarket. We are worried this area could become even busier and more dangerous since the opening of a new Sainsbury on Globe Road, close to where pedestrians try and cross. Many children, families, and elderly people use the junction daily. We understand these locations are under TfL's jurisdiction as the A11 is a red route, and the Tower Hamlets Council has also raised this concerns directly, but TfL has said they have no plans to change the traffic signals to introduce a pedestrian phase or any crossings. Local councillors and residents are aware of many near misses and actual accidents over the years. We urge TfL to prioritise pedestrian safety and work with Tower Hamlets Council to bring forward pedestrian crossings as soon as possible. The petition has 418 signatories and was organised by Bethnal Green councillors Sirajul Islam and Amy Whitelock Gibbs and St. Dunstan's councillor Ayaz Mia.
Yes, let's do them one at a time then. Yeah. Can I ask the Assembly to agree to forward the petition to the Mayor as Chair of Transport for London for a response? Agreed? Yeah. Second one?
Thank you, Chair. The second motion is about the bus 100 route in Wapping and changes to the frequency. And the prayer reads, the petition, the prayer reads, TfL, don't make us wait longer for 100 bus. Transport for London should stick to its word. Earlier this year, when TfL cut the length of the 100 bus route, it promised that there would be no changes to the frequency of the route. But TfL just published plans to cut the frequency, to slash the frequency of the 100 from the 4th of November, meaning Wapping residents will have to wait up to 50% longer for their bus. TfL is planning to decrease the frequency of the 100 from every 8 minutes to every 12 minutes. The route is one of only 2 bus routes in Wapping. Cutting it just isn't right. The change shouldn't have been introduced without discussing with local residents first. The 100 bus link is also a vital connection for disabled people with limited mobility and parents with pushchairs who don't have access to Wapping Station because of its lack of ticket hall platform accessibility. In addition, many will experience disproportionate disadvantage waiting for longer for a bus in the cold and wet of winter. So this move could leave people isolated in their own homes. Your local councillor, Denise Jones, Mayor John Biggs, and London Assembly member Umesh Desai have launched a campaign calling on TfL to reverse the decision to cut the frequency of the 100 bus service in Wapping. We need to demonstrate local opposition to TfL's decision. We, the undersigned, call on TfL to scrap their decision to cut the frequency of the 100 bus routes serving Wapping. The petition has 180 signatures and was organized by local councillor Dennis Jones and local resident Abdullah with the support of other local residents.
Can I ask the Assembly to agree to forward the petition to the Mayor as Chair of TfL for us? Thank you. And your third?
I think, Caroline, please. Do you want me to do my third down in one go? Because of order paper.
I've called upon you
yes, Chair.
to deliver
I do what I'm told. The third petition is about the state of crossings in the Fairfield Road area and the Bow Road area of Tower Hamlets. The prayer is, residents are concerned about the state of the crossings at the south of Fairfield Road, nearby over Bow Road. Not only is there no signal crossing at the bottom of Fairfield Road, but also the crossing times over Bow Road, both near Bow Church and near the registry office, are not nearly long enough to get over the crossing in one stage. We call on Transport for London to establish reasonable crossing times which prioritize pedestrians and cyclists, and to support a safe and signal crossing at the south of Fairfield Road. The petition has 173 signatures and was organized with the support of local residents by Bow East councillors Rachel Blake, Amina Ali and Mark Francis.
Can I ask the Assembly to agree to forward the petition to the Mayor as Chair of TfL for a response?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can I call upon Assembly Member Pigeon to present the petition listed on the agenda in her name?
Thank you very much. I have a petition which, as of this morning, had 902 signatures. We, the undersigned, express our concern and opposition to the proposed 50% reduction in the RV1 bus route from 6 to 3 buses an hour. The RV1 runs from Tower Hill to Covent Garden, through Borough, Bankside and Waterloo, and provides a well-loved community service connecting many communities in South, Central and East London. The RV1 is an important tourist route between Covent Garden, London Eye, South Bank Centre, Tate Modern, Globe Theatre, Tower Bridge and Tower of London. We are concerned by the lack of consultation held by TfL to reduce this service. We believe it is important to promote the use of public transport to improve air quality and make London more sustainable and green. We call upon the Mayor of London and TfL to request that the reduction in this service is paused or stopped to allow a full and proper consultation on these proposals.
Can I ask the Assembly to agree to forward the petition to the Mayor as Chair of TfL for response? Thank you very much. Can I ask members... Can I ask the members to note the response received to a petition presented at a recent Assembly plenary meeting as set out in the report? Thank you. So is somebody collecting petitions? Yeah, we can collect the petitions. Members, in accordance with Standing Order 2.9, can I ask the Assembly to agree to extend the meeting in order to finish the business or any part of the business on the agenda? Thank you. Let's then move on to motions. Can I call upon Assembly Member Dismore to move the motion in his name? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It may come as a surprise to some to learn that significantly more people drown in our river each year than are killed when cycling on our roads. Some drownings will be suicide or self-harm calls for help. Others will be accidents, and of course we can all remember the Marchioness disaster. Tower is the RNLI's busiest lifeboat station in the country, with 540 calls last year, a 15th of their total calls nationwide, and they have an impressive launch time of 90 seconds because they have full-time crews. If they can reach someone in the river within 5 minutes, they've got a good chance of saving them, and 70% of their calls are for people in the river from bridges or embankments. Services with the rail in search and rescue include the Metropolitan Police Service, London Fire Brigade, the Port of London Authority, as well as the RNLI. One simple thing that can be done to help speed up emergency attendance is for people to use 999 to call the Coast Guard, who lead on maritime search and rescue and mobilise the lifeboats. Encouraging calls to the Coast Guard can be helped by ensuring that lifebuoy boxes on bridges and embankments display the standardised 999 call the Coast Guard signage, which TfL are doing, but not all riparian boroughs have done so far. Indeed, between Hayes Galleria and City Hall this morning, I counted 3 lifebuoy boxes installed by Southwark, which is good, but none of them have the signs telling people to call the Coast Guard 999. In January this year, all river walls and Thames bridges owned by TfL were inspected for the appropriate distribution of lifebuoys, and TfL identified that 42 new installations were required, with a further 22 requiring updated information panels. This was determined using guidance provided by RNLI, and they're scheduled to be installed by the end of this month. A weekly inspection of all TfL equipment is undertaken, with any missing lifebuoys replaced within 24 hours and damage to housings repaired within 7 days. And on piers operated by the London River Services, safety equipment is checked daily. Training is also important for all those who work on or near the river. For example, bar staff in pubs on the embankments, security staff, council workers, to know that they should call the Coast Guard if somebody falls or jumps in. We should also bear in mind the substantial developments along the riverbank, for example, the wide-scale development of the East London Thames North Bank. Encouragement is needed for safe and responsible development that ensures water safety is inherent in these newly built environments, so as to ensure safe access and egress and safe use of the river by their residents, and this ought to be secured by planning conditions. The Thames Water Safety Forum have been working together for 2 years, first to carry out an extensive combined multi-agency community water safety risk assessment, an IRMP, which those who are on LFIPA will know about, for the river, then to jointly understand the hazards, risks, issues and challenges from this, to form a strategic group to deliver the interventions needed to reduce the drowning death toll. They're currently a couple of months away from finalising and publishing this strategy, and will need our help and that of the Mayor to publicise and implement it, which is why the motion calls on the Mayor to do all he can to support the efforts of the Thames River Safety Forum to reduce deaths from drowning, to encourage TfL and the Riparian Brothers to do the same, and to take a personal interest in improving outcomes. So I hope that this motion we can pass today unanimously. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Desai, will you second the motion?
I second it formally, but reserve my right to come in.
Okay. Do I have any speakers to this motion? No. Okay. Assembly Member Desai, do you wish to speak? Okay. Assembly Member Dismore, do you have anything to submit?
I can't really submit my own speech.
No,
so.
no. Okay.
So I'll pass on that.
Okay. Can we go to the vote? Can we see those in favour of the motion?
That's unanimous, Chair.
Unanimous. Thank you very much. Next motion in the name of Assembly Member Dr. Sahota.
Thank you, Chair. It is a privilege for me to bring this motion to the Assembly to support the setting up of a National Second War Memorial to recognise the sacrifice that they made for the freedoms which we enjoy in our country today. It's also an honour for me to bring this motion before, because I'm a Sikh, although I don't wear a turban, but I'm on that journey. And this year also marks the ending of the 100 years of the ending of the World War I. And so at the outset, I want to recognise and make a note that it wasn't Britain alone at war during the World Wars. It was the British Empire that was at war. It was Britain, along with its former colonies, who together fought those World War IIs. And that's a recognition which we need to accept, that what happened in the last century. Citizens of those countries, which are now in the Commonwealth, were drafted into the British Army and joined the British soldiers in that war effort. And I want to recognize and salute all the soldiers from all over the world who fought with the British soldiers, all the soldiers of faith and of no faith who fought for the freedom that we enjoy in this country. We salute them all in recognition and the basis of this motion. But the contribution of the Sikhs was extraordinary and exemplary. At that time, they formed 2% of the Indian population, but they were 20% of the British Indian Army. They achieved, up to 1945, 14 Victoria Crosses, which was unique given the size of the Sikh regiments and the size of the population. During the World War I, the Sikh regiments fought in Palestine, Egypt, Haifa in Israel, Mesopotamia, France, and Gallipoli. During World War, the Sikh regiments, 6 battalions served in Burma, Singapore, Italy, Iraq, and gained 27 honours. During the last 2 wars, world wars, 83,000 Sikhs gave the sacrifice of their lives for the freedoms which we enjoy today. 135,000 Sikhs were injured in those 2 wars. And now we have something like 140,000 Sikhs living in Greater London. Sir Winston Churchill fought in the Sikh regiments as a young soldier. He served he learned the bravery, the courage of the Sikh forces when he served with them. And speaking in Parliament in the last century, when the Sikhs were fighting for exemption to wear the helmet when you ride a motorcycle, Sir Winston Churchill said, "British people are highly indebted and obliged to the Sikhs for a long time. I know that within this century, we needed their help twice, and they did help us very much. As a result of their timely help, we are today able to live with honor, dignity, and independence. In the war, they fought and died for us wearing their turbans. That was the level of recognition which someone who fought with them, and the Prime Minister of this country has given. So the Sikh community in the United Kingdom are united in a desire for a National Sikh War Memorial in the capital. It's important that we recognize the contribution of the Sikhs in the wars, not only for what they did in history, but also for bettering community cohesion in our country now. The Sikh Memorial will be a public display of the recognition of the roles played by soldiers from all over the Commonwealth in the British, with the British Army. It'll be a place where school children will come and learn about things, where visitors to London will recognize that Great Britain is a multicultural society and the richness and fabric that underlies this society. But let me just tell you, the greatest need for this memorial was only recently became aware about 2-3 weeks ago. A Sikh gentleman was queuing outside Portocolo's house to visit Parliament, to be seen by Mr. Tantesi, who's the first turban-wearing MP in this country, to visit him. And whilst he was in the queue, someone filled with hatred came along and tried to knock off that gentleman's turban and said, "You Muslim, go back home." The Speaker of the House of Commons publicly apologized for that event, for which we are all very sorry for what happened in London. But also it does tell us how much we need to educate children. The only thing we can do, I know, Madam Chair, that you are pointing at me, but I was hoping that you might bear with me, right, because this is a very important motion and that I normally don't take the stage too much in the Assembly.
Concluding comment.
Pardon?
Your last paragraph.
Okay, yes. But look, I hope that we can support this unanimously. I hope that we can show Londoners and the world that we support this and recognize people who gave their lives for the freedom to enjoy ourselves. And I hope that we can, and also at the end of this debate, there will be a placard for you to come and have to take, and if you want to take it, put it on the Twitter feed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Whittle.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I just would like to add our wholehearted support to this motion. Also, may I say, Assembly Member Sahota, what an elegant speech that was. And so therefore, I do hope that you take the floor more often. I think that this is something which should have everyone's support in the House. Oh, the Assembly, should I say. And indeed, the Sikh community today is one of the most patriotic of communities in this country, and indeed it contributes hugely. So this recognition is long overdue. When it comes to a central London site, I do hope that it's in Westminster somewhere. I think it should be nothing less than that. So we would like to offer our complete support. Thank you.
Yes, and my apologies to Assemblymember Cooper. I jumped over your second in. Can I just backtrack and call on you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to speak very briefly to second this motion. It's my privilege to do so, not because I'm a Sikh, but because I believe that Assembly members, whether Sikh or not, I hope are going to support this. Members of my family fought in India and fought in Burma during the Second World War, and it's been my privilege as a Wandsworth councillor to go on a cross-party trip on a number of occasions to visit some of the battlefield sites and some of the cemeteries in France and Belgium. And it's very apparent if you walk around the largest of those cemeteries, Tynecourt, or indeed any of the others, that not everybody who died for this country was necessarily from the same background. There are headstones that commemorate Sikhs, Jews, Christians, and so on and so forth. And you can also tell from the names that people came from a wide range of backgrounds. And I think it's really important that we do honour the sacrifices that have been made. And I think towards the end of Assemblymember Sahota's speech, he was just talking about education. And I think one of the things that we are not necessarily very good at in our schools is making sure that children completely understand all of the sacrifices that have been made by all of the diverse communities in this country. And I think this monument would be an opportunity to start to set that right. I second.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Assemblymember Bacon.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. This is an excellent motion. I can't overstate how much I support it. Dr. Sahota was completely correct to quote Winston Churchill, who was, of course, very clear throughout the Second World War that it was the British Empire at war with Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, not just Great Britain. It went much further than that. And, of course, it wasn't just in the two world wars of the last century. It goes back way before that. The Duke of Wellington in India depended very greatly on Indian soldiers, largely Sikhs, for the work that he did there. This is long overdue recognition for the contribution of Sikh soldiers. For some reason, some of the allies that Great Britain had during the two world wars get significant recognition, and others have been almost forgotten in time, and Sikhs are absolutely part of that. Personally speaking, I mean, to agree completely with Assemblymember Whittle, I think it's very important that not only do we get this monument that Dr. Sofa is calling for, but that it is somewhere very prominent and preferably in Westminster. I wouldn't like to pick a location, but there is a fourth plinth in Trafalgar Square that at the moment has something that looks vaguely phallic on it, which I think could certainly be used to much better purposes, and I would personally be very supportive of that if that was to be there, but if it doesn't have to be there, it could be somewhere else. The central point, though, is that there has to be some recognition, some very significant recognition of the contribution that has been made, so I warmly support this motion.
So, Assemblymember Bailey.
When I read this motion, I thought to myself, what an excellent motion this is. You know, indeed, the community secretary, Sabit Javid, also has thrown his support behind this to find some funding and a site for the memorial. As we know, Britain is made up of many communities. Some of those communities have a long relationship with this country and have given so much to this country, and the Sikh community stands as one of the leading communities that way. Indeed, their relationship with the armed forces is some 160 years old. They have fought in many of the toughest battles that this country has ever fought. They have been a huge part and a huge leading light on how you are brave as a soldier. For some of you who don't know, I have quite a strong military link. I'm an honorary colonel for the Army Cadet Force. I have a relationship with our colleagues across the war, the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers. And when I speak to modern soldiers, they're aware, they're really aware of how Sikh soldiers conducted themselves and the impact they made on the armed forces, but more importantly, this country. When you talk about Sikh communities, you're talking about a community that does hundreds of thousands of pounds of volunteering every year. You're talking about a community that adds some 7.6 billion to the income of this country. You're talking about a community that is so integrated, that has acted as a leading light for many other immigrant communities of how to come to this country, get on and get ahead and raise your family. So again, when I read this and I saw that 83,000 Sikh soldiers gave their life, 100,000 soldiers between the two great wars I'm talking now, were injured, it just shows you the level of commitment that the Sikh community has had towards this country. The modern Sikh community is here and thriving. Dr. Sahota talked about the large number, 140,000 just in London alone, who are active Londoners, who constantly pump business in Londoners. I spoke to one of my friends who happens to be a Sikh, and he was very proud of the fact that they're mostly homeowners. He's a very proud man about that. He's trying to say how much they've taken on the British dream, which for many people has struggled to exist. The Sikh community has grabbed it with both hands. But why this is seriously, really important, again, something that Dr. Sahota alluded to, there's a number of communities who fought in the world wars, who sometimes feel forgotten. And a nation that forgets its allies will soon be forgotten itself. So this memorial is not only important to the Sikh community, it's important to the British community, every single one of us. It shows our smaller communities that you will not be forgotten. Your contribution is important. Britain welcomes you. So having this happen here in London, hopefully somewhere in Westminster, somewhere very prominent, sends a message. The Sikh community are not only for themselves, they're for Britain and everybody else as well. I commend you all. I'm sure I don't need to support this motion. Thank you.
Summation, Assembly Member Dr.
Yeah, look, I'm humbled by the support I've had. I'm grateful. I might become emotional, but I won't. But I'm thankful for all the support.
Thank you so much. Can I see those in favour of the motion? Unanimous. Thank you very much. And then the final motion, I believe, is in the name of Assembly Member Pigeon.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Air pollution is one of the biggest challenges facing London, affecting the health of Londoners, and it contributes, as we know, to thousands of early deaths each year and impacts our health over the course of our lives, and it can lead to decreased lung function in our children, greater risk of dementia and strokes as we get older. And of course there are a number of causes of air pollution, from industrial sites, domestic boilers, but in London a primary cause in pollution is from road traffic. Around 50% of NOx emissions in Greater London are from road transport. When you look at any map of air pollution levels in London, it highlights the greatest levels of air pollution and where traffic levels are highest. So this motion seeks to push the Mayor to go further in one specific area, that of reducing the number of vehicles that keep their engines running while stationary. Some people keep their engines running for a number of factors, and many of these are just myths. You know, it's, for example, thought by some people that starting an engine causes more pollution than idling. That's a myth. It's thought by some that the engine needs to stay on to keep the battery fully charged. Again, that's a myth. Some people think it's better to idle than turn the engine off and on because it wears out the engine. Once again, that's a myth. So this motion seeks to step up the awareness-raising work taking place to tackle these myths and ensure that if you think you're going to be stationary for a minute or so, then simply turn off your engine. So whether you're waiting at Tower Bridge or waiting at a railway crossing such as down at Mortlake, turn off your engine. And also if you're parking up, for, maybe meeting someone, actually turn off your engine. Now we know TfL is taking some steps in this area, but we think a lot more could be done. And in answer to a recent mayoral question, I was told that there are a few information campaigns running across 11 boroughs, but that means the majority of London boroughs are not having any campaigns taking place to raise awareness of this issue. And TfL could also do more in ensuring compliance from taxi and private hire drivers, and also the GLA family fleet as a whole could lead the way. So really this is a small measure that if every car, van, taxi, lorry driver stopped idling, it would not end air pollution, but it would make a difference, and it's a small difference that could easily be made. I urge everyone to support the motion.
Thank you. Can I call upon Member Copley to second the motion?
Chair, I'm in danger of being late to meet my mum for lunch, so I'm going to do it formally and reserve my rights, just in case.
Can I? Okay. Assembly Member
Just a hint,
Bacon.
Yes, on this side we do agree with some of what the Mayor is proposing around air quality. There are some things, of course, which he's proposing, such as the Central London ultra-low emission zone, which were, of course, proposed by his predecessor, Boris Johnson. We supported it then. It would be very strange if we didn't support doing that now. We don't agree with everything that he wants to do on air quality, so I don't want people to interpret the way we're about to vote as giving blanket approval to everything that he's doing in this area, because it isn't. However, there is nothing in the specifics of the motion as drafted that we oppose, so we will be voting in favour of it today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other speakers? Oh, sorry. Assembly Member Berry.
Thank you, Chair. I won't talk for too long, but obviously this is an issue that is something we care greatly about in the Greens. It's something that constituents contact us quite often about. I've contacted my colleague, Caroline Russell, asked her to put in some casework on my behalf because of the constant idling that goes on outside St Pancras station, which I think is a canyon. I think it really leads to enormous problems. I think this is a really good motion. We must do more. We must get the Mayor to do more to use the powers that he does have to take action on engine idling. We have asked the Mayor to get more powers. The power to issue penalties would be extremely useful if TfL had those. We've also lobbied the government and the DVLA to send out reminders, mythbusters, the sorts of thing that Assembly Member Pigeon was talking about during the vehicle exercise duty renewal process. Because I think a lot of these myths are what lead to a lot of unnecessary idling by people who are not necessarily doing it on purpose. So fully support this motion and thank you for putting it.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, it's okay. Assembly Member Copley.
No, that's fine, Chair.
Right. Assembly Member Pigeon. Summation?
No.
No. I didn't see you, Assembly Member Whittle. Assembly Member Whittle.
Madam Chairman, yes, just wanted to add our voices to this motion and support the motion. It seems to me to be just done in a spirit of public spiritedness. There's no ideology particularly attached to it. It's a bit like really not wanting to drop litter when you don't need to drop litter. I do think, although we disagree politically on many, many things, probably most things, I do think that Assembly Member Pigeon, does stand out for her sense of public spiritedness, public service, so we're happy to support her on this occasion.
Thank you.
Make the most of it, Carol.
I will. Thank you.
Thanks. Right. And any points of summation, Assembly Member Pigeon? No, thank you. Okay, let's go to the vote. Those in favour of the motion? Unanimous. Thank you very much. That completes the motions. Now, Assembly members, stay with me. We've got some other things to do. Mayoral commitments. Can I ask that the Assembly notes the commitments made by the Mayor, Sadiq Khan, during the London Assembly Mayor's Question Time meeting held between September 2017 and February 2018. The next meeting of the the next meeting of the London Assembly scheduled to be the Mayor's Question Time meeting, which will take place at 10 a.m. on Thursday, the 22nd March 2018, in the Chamber, City Hall. We're now on any other business or point of order.
If I may, Chair. And with apologies to Tom Copley, whose mother is waiting for lunch. Today marks International Women's Day, and I want to put on record the Assembly's support for the work being done in the fight for equal rights for women, both internationally and much closer at home at the GLA. Nancy Astor was the first woman to take her seat as an MP. This was about 100 years ago, and much progress has been made since then. But barriers to women seeking public or political office or top positions remain, such as returning to work after having children. And I think it's a demonstration of the strength of my colleague, Assembly Member Eshalomi, that she and others who've had children while serving on the Assembly continue to serve the public while caring for their children. And obviously, in Florence Eshalomi's case, we've seen Malachi here, and it's a credit to the GLA that is both modern and flexible enough to accommodate Assembly Member Eshalomi to represent the Londoners that elected her. It sets an example to other organisations. It's the future of our democracy. And finally, and I will say this is finally, it's a credit to Malachi, who sits quietly through meetings, behaving much better than many members and demonstrating a different way of holding public meetings is achievable. A way that can accommodate the voice of women.
Assembly Member Twycross, you're giving a speech. Can you bring it to an end?
It's very near the end.
Thank
we
you.
welcome him, and his presence has made the Assembly a better place, and we'll miss him when he starts nursery in April.
Okay, it started off well, and that was where the point of order came in, and I accept that. Thank you very much. And the point of order was to remind us, I think, that this is International Women's Day. At that, let us... can I just ask members to stay a while, if they would like to take a picture about showing the world through a tweet that we are here supporting International Women's Day. Some cards are available, and I think Assembly Member Sahota asked Assembly members to just stand with him with a plaque, so that should take about 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
GLA Chamber